This is something that I read all the time, not just in other people's YouTube comments and other people's YouTube videos, but even in ours these days, as we've grown and attracted a different kind of audience than the lovely people who typically listen to this podcast. And what we're hearing, what I'm reading, is that modern comics just aren't that good. That whatever it is, the magic of comics that made them a medium that was read by millions and millions and millions of people decades ago, a quality dip that has led to that audience shrinking and dwindling. And the reason? Well, of course, it's because the writers, artists, and editors who work in comics today are so inferior and so woke that they just cannot bring themselves to tell good stories anymore. So the question is, what we're going to talk about here in our opening topic, in our main discussion is, are modern comics just worse than the classics? Are comics not good anymore? We've got a full house on deck to have this conversation. We've got Cale,
What's up, hot dogs?
Marco,
Schwamo.
Tyler,
Blammo.
and I'm Sean. Hello, hello. Thank you for joining us, whether you are with us live or in the future. We've got a big show planned for you. In addition to what I just teased, we're also going to be talking about DC's shift to Wednesdays and how that may or may not have affected comic book sales. We're going to talk about the new Venom. We know when Daniel Warren Johnson's time on Transformers will end, so we'll get into that. And we're going to talk about a brand new publisher entering the fray. So lots of things on deck. We've got our Marvel event countdown as well, and a new entry into the Pals verse. All that on today's episode of the Comics Pals. Let's jump right into it. You guys heard the question. Are modern comic books worse than the classics? When I say the classics, I'm really talking about comics that came out, let's say, before the last 20 or so years. Now, of course, what's classic to an individual is often going to come down to when they grew up.
Yeah.
So for the people on here, or at least me, Tyler, and Cale, the classics of our era are going to be the 2000s.
The odds.
Yeah. But we're really not the age group of people that are saying this, right? Some of us are, I guess. Some of the people in the comment sections are. But largely, I think it's folks older than us. But you guys understand the premise. Where do you come down on this conversation?
What's that Simpsons meme? Old man yelling at cloud with,
Yeah.
with Grandpa Simpson. That's kind of how I feel, but that seems a little more dismissive than I really mean to be. I just like the meme. You are typically going to have a certain affinity and a certain love for the comics that you, I guess, not grew up reading, but grew up with the medium that is comics. Because some people might have read comics, started in the 30s. I wouldn't say they're growing up with comics, but they are growing with comics as a medium. So whatever is your entry point that really suckered you into love comics is going to be like your first love. And that's what you're going to kind of start comparing things to. I don't think that is a bad thing. That is how people work. If that's the thing they loved, that's the comparison that everything else is going to kind of lean on going forward. My issue is when it becomes, oh, I am reading comics still. I read, I don't know if you read in the 90s even, if you started in the 90s and you're still reading now. Sure, nothing might not be as good as, I don't know, like Morrison's JLA or Morrison's X-Men. Towards the tail end, it shows how bad I can't even think of a good 90s thing. Jim Lee's X-Men. Okay. Jim Lee's X-Men. It's okay to compare the two, but I think there's needs to be room for growth and kind of painting with large swaths of like, oh, modern comics just aren't good in comparison. And then coming up with things like, oh, because the writers aren't good. Oh, because the art isn't good. Have you seen Dan Mora? That's just emphatically wrong. It's a lack of evolution from a personal level that I find annoying.
Let me tell you, Sean, a lack of evolution the artists and writers of today's time.
No, you're right.
Because back in the 80s, I love Swamp Thing, I love Alan Moore, I love Watchmen, I love all of these comics. And the new stuff, maybe a book here, maybe a book there. That's how I know the old stuff's better. Because there's so much of it that I like more. I'm not out there discovering new comics. I'm loving the comics that I've read for years.
That's fair.
Which is funny. I don't even know if you're doing a bit or not, Marco, because you always compare things to Swamp Thing.
Well, the other, like, his joke there is based in, like, truth. The problem that surrounds this conversation is a lack of evolution in or a lack of recognizable evolution in what, you know, what could be good, branching outside of topics and things that will challenge a reader. You know, I think if you don't examine yourself and your biases, you're not gonna have a good time. Maybe you just don't like comics, and we've talked about that several times. You know, I think it's just wild to say that comics aren't as good as they were. I'm working my way. I literally just finished an issue of the Fourth World Omnibus before we started recording, and I can't help but keep comparing some of this stuff to Tom King's Mr. Miracle. And I haven't even seen Mr. Miracle yet. But it's just like so much of it works in tandem with old stuff. And I think, you know, to say that stuff hasn't grown and hasn't evolved, like, is nuts, because it means that you're not looking inward, because everything evolves. And if you're not looking at yourself and you're not evolving, then you're saying other stuff isn't.
What's up, Steve Matthews, Brian Atkins, Rami Darwish, Q Lumbo, Amin Perez, hey Leatrick, CW Gordon, how you doing? Dan Trudeau, what's up, Dan? Good to see you all. Appreciate you guys. Those are just the people I can see right now. Glad to have you with us, whether you're live or in the future. Make sure you smash that like button, subscribe to the channel if you have not. Thank you to everybody who does both of those things. So I think that this question is obviously a bit loaded, you know, no doubt. And I think that I've seen more of this over the last couple of weeks than any other time in my life, because mostly I could just ignore these kinds of comments, you know, and not be in the spaces where they're at. But because the space they're at is in the comment section of our videos, it's hard for me to not see it. So I really wanted to take this thought process at face value for this conversation, because we're here to talk about it. And I don't want to just outright dismiss anything. So go ahead.
Dan suggests that we should have just said no and then ended the show.
I mean,
10
we
minutes.
have a lot more
live.
time, yeah.
I think to that point of like a fair analysis, I think people also look back at things from a lens of again, multitude, but you have to also think about it that there were other comics being published that haven't stood that test of time. So percentage wise, has it always been that a small portion of the current day's book of a certain time period only made it to be so lasting? And I think that you can see that working backwards. You can see what books stand the test of time, what become recommendations, where people get influences from. But in the current moment, you have to find those a lot more, because you have to do more of that digging for yourself. It doesn't get presented. It's in the mix of all the books that exist currently, and not all of those are going to be winners. But I think in the same way that not all of those were winners back in the day, and it's only the stuff that has risen to the top that you can take a look back on.
Well, the perspective that I wanted to get into is, yeah, I mean, everybody's gonna have their favorites from whenever they started reading comics. That's just how it is. and that's cool. There's nothing at all wrong with that. And quite frankly, I love where comics are at. I think comics overall are in a really good spot, and I'm happy with that. But let's not look at the whole industry, because when people say that comics are bad now, they're mostly not people who are reading non-big two stuff.
Yeah.
Most of the time, they're referring very specifically to Marvel and DC because that's their home in comics, and they're not finding the stories that appeal to them in those spaces anymore. Well, what has changed most in the last 20 years of comics? What's changed most in the last 40 years of comics? The kinds of voices that get to tell stories in comics, the kinds of people that get to tell stories in comics. Now, you wouldn't know that if you looked at the DC, some of the images that have come out from some of the dinners that the DC creators have had, and some of the pictures that have been taken of them, because it is, they're all white except Rom V. Rom V's just in those pictures like, hey guys, I'm here too, you know. But outside of that, it's all, people cut from similar cloths, at least in terms of being straight and white, which I'm not denigrating. No problem with that. It's just the nature of the beast, I guess.
Mm.
But, for every Scott Snyder out there, we do have a Kelly Thompson who's killing it and sort of changing the game. There is a Gail Simone who has risen to the upper echelons. You get an aforementioned Rom V. There are a lot of different kinds of people telling comic book stories right now.
And that's not to disinclude, not a word, the people behind the scenes, your Heather Antos, your other I know there are more, and
They're behind the
big
scenes, though.
names.
That's why.
Your editors, your letterers, your colorers, colorists, that are people of color, women, that don't get in photos in those same summits.
I mean, last time they were in a photo, it caused a whole uproar on the internet, so I don't blame them.
Forget it. That was ridiculous. Yeah, I mean, you're right, Cale, for sure. And there are great editors, there are great, women, people of color working all throughout the industry.
Mm-hmm.
And while yes, there have always been women making comic books, there has never been this much ability to know who is making your comics, and knowing who's making your comics and then seeing their faces can immediately alter the way you perceive the work. But it goes beyond that, because what is Rom V gonna do when he gets into the comic space? Rom V is not going to just keep telling the same stories that have been told, because Rom has a different perspective on the world. So Rom's perspective on the world will alienate some people. And those people are people who have largely wanted to consume and been able to consume the exact same kinds of stories on a conveyor belt forever. So it's challenging because it's so different. And I get that. I get why that would be alienating. That makes sense to me. I understand why somebody who has loved to death Steve Rogers for 40 years of their life would say, I don't know about this Sam Wilson guy. I don't know if I'm with that. I don't know if I can connect to that character. And especially when, in order to get Sam, Steve Rogers has to be off the table. Now my favorite character, who I love to death, is gone, replaced by some black dude that was the sidekick. I liked him when he was the Falcon. What is this new stuff? He ain't Cap. He's not my Cap. And there's the rub. Not my is something that we respect. When someone says it about an era of Batman, but not when someone says it about the difference between Steve Rogers and Sam Wilson. You get what I'm putting down?
I mean, that started back when I remember that being a thing during the Obama administration, not my president, right? What's the similarity there? And so I think it's a lot more charged now.
Yeah, it's something that people are definitely feeling. And again, I'm trying to add validity to it. Is the only difference between Sam and Steve that one is black and one is white? No, it's not. But there are a lot of things that come with seeing the image of a black man in Captain America's costume that might make people uncomfortable. I'm not
outside of
saying that's a good way to feel, but it is how some people feel.
yeah.
I just think that there is I know it's uncomfortable, but like I think it's okay to be uncomfortable in art, and I think that should be the goal of art sometimes. It's to challenge you. Like when I think of uh, somebody who only wants the same thing, like you said, Sean, conveyor belt, same thing over and over again. That's what's comfortable. Yes, it's comfortable, but what are you really doing, in my opinion? Like, if it's nothing new, are you just treading water in this hobby? Like, I think it would be good for people to try new things. You don't need to try, Sam Wilson Captain America. If that's not for you, I don't know. Try reading an image book. Try something different in the industry. If that's not good for you.
But maybe you become complacent with I'm picking up my Marvel, I'm picking up my DC, and so now that there's in that complacency, you find that well, the stuff that you're picking up, the threads that you've been following, you're not as interested in anymore, and I think you blame your lack of interest for the lack of quality, and I think sometimes that could be true, but then in other senses, to what Kayla said earlier, you're not also not evolving with the way that people are telling sequential comic stories nowadays, and I think. You can't blame or you should be reflective enough to not blame your taste on the quality when it doesn't meet a certain expectation or standard.
But why? Because sometimes the quality is down.
I
Like
mean,
I don't like Jed McKay's anything. And I feel like those stories aren't for me. I would love to be able to read Avengers, but I can't because Jed McKay's on the damn book. So what am I supposed to do?
Got
I,
nothing to do with Clea being the new Sorcerer Supreme. Just
Right.
don't
you
like
just
Jed
don't like
McKay.
that.
But
Yeah,
wouldn't you consider that a taste thing, Sean?
Uh it doesn't really matter if it is or isn't. The fact is I don't like it. And
sure.
I want to be able to read Avengers, but this fucking guy, and I'm just, this guy is on it and he won't tell the stories that I want to read. He won't tell the good stories.
I think that in my brain, something like that becomes like the ability to, or the inability to take away your taste from, is this good or not? I'm not saying you, Sean. I know you're kind of playing a character in the situation, but sometimes when somebody will see that and will comment on it on YouTube or whatever, it seems a little more like, oh, this is factual rather than this is just not for me.
Well, in the case of Jed, I do believe it's factual, but be that as it may. No, I mean, but sometimes it is. Some
Yeah,
like not everything is good. And there has to be room to say, look, the quality of this is not up. Everybody has seen things that you can say, technically, this ain't it. This is just not it. We can see art, right? And go, I don't know, man. I read Gotham City Sirens #2. All respect to the artist who did it. That was a major step down from Matteo Lolli's work. It is what it is.
This is tricky for me because like my gut reaction is like, oh, art is subjective, and what I like is somebody might not like. So it's hard for me to come down on it with like good, not good. But then I remember reading some Dynamite books. It was like a Vampirella issue where like there was two panels covering a whole page, but the panels looked like they were the size of a 4-panel page. So there was just two big black areas for no narrative purpose.
But I
Technically,
think
that's bad.
but I think that's where the nuance of the conversation
Sure.
is
Yeah.
that's lost in the YouTube comments.
right,
You know,
right.
it's it's not, you know, oh, these panels are bad because they're badly formatted and they don't serve a purpose in the story. It's just, man, this fucking sucks.
Yeah, right. There's a lack of great word nuance in those conversations, and not everybody is responsible for being able to articulate. Well, we should all be responsible for how we articulate ourselves. But not everybody is going to be able to come to the table and be able to, eloquently explain why they don't like issue number 27 of Batman. But you just know you don't like something. It's like when you go to the movies and you and your buddy leave your seats and you exit the theater and you go, wow, that sucked. And that's allowed. You're allowed to do that.
Have you done that for like a movie, like just left midway?
Yes, I went to go
Yeah.
see Gina Carano's Haywire.
That's on
And
you.
that was the worst movie I have ever been to see. And it is the only time I left the theater in the middle of a film. I probably got through 40 minutes of it.
Is that the one Ben Shapiro produced?
Dude, I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah. So, but that is a valid thing. Like, to read something or see something and just be like, wow, that was ass. And that's it. And why should I expect that people aren't going to hit my comment section and say that? Of course they will. We all do it in our minds, and people put what they think on comment sections.
Yeah.
And we have a platform where we invite that beginning of a discussion.
Right. MP with the $5 super chat. Thanks, MP. Kicking off our super chats for today. Of course, super chats are wide open for anybody who wants to get into that. MP says, alternatively, are there past eras for DC, Marvel, or certain characters you do think we can say are demonstrably better or worse than most? So I am deliberately trying to open us up, the panelists and the listeners, to the idea that some things can be bad and that we can have a conversation about that without it automatically having to be that saying that something isn't good is a bad thing to say. There can be bad things, right? We all know it. We pass on books on Pals Pulls all the time. And sometimes we're like, wow, this ain't it. And we explain it, but that's what we come down on. So to answer MP's question, I think there are. Like, if you ask me, I say it all the time. Marvel's down right now. I don't think Marvel as a whole is doing their thing right now. There are books I really enjoy. I'm not saying it's all bad. There are books I like quite a bit. I think Marvel's down. We know that the industry struggled a lot in the 90s, and we saw how, in part, the quality dip in storytelling affected the sales. We know it. There were a lot of other factors. I'm not trying to pin it all on one thing, but that was a part of it.
I think there's a lot of editorial or line-wide issues, too, that can cause these things. Like when I read MP's comment, are there any past eras for DC or Marvel or certain characters you think we could demonstrably say are better than or worse than most? First thing that jumped to my head was Mark Waid's Wally West run on The Flash. The Flash was good then because that was the only one, in my opinion, because it wasn't diluted with, Barry being there too, replacement Wally still being around. Like, I can see that, but like, it's not necessarily a condemnation or, I mean, sure, Mark Waid was fucking fantastic on it. But it's also because of everything surrounding it as well.
Whatever it is, whatever the reasoning is, I think we have to be able to have I dislike. We talk all the time about negative channels. Okay, we get it. We get that. I dislike channels where every review is either, wow, this was excellent, I really loved it, or this just wasn't for me. That's not meaningful to me. I don't want to hear that. If I'm listening to a review, it's because I want someone's take on why this is good or why it's not. And yes, we could always add the addendum to that person, but I don't need you to say that every single time. I need to know why you don't like this. If a review doesn't have a little bit of bite when you don't like something, then I don't believe you. I don't believe you. I need to hear it.
Yeah.
That reminds me of like when you're as a kid told to write essays, to never write "in my opinion" because it's from you. We have already understood that. Speak on it. Don't add qualifiers to it.
Dan Trudeau says there are Renaissance eras for an industry, company, etc. There is also the inverse. That said, there are always good books to read, movies to see, etc., even at low points.
For sure. Uh, I think and in with that specifically, I was thinking of Image Comics of 10 years ago. The that initial Image boom and 2011 to 14, there was just an influx of new ideas, genres, and maybe a few years after, I feel like I remember there was a lot of what felt like derivative stories, especially within the sci-fi genre, coming out of Image at the time, and I think we're seeing sort of like a Skybound, whatever Image imprint and all that, but I think yes, even at the low points, there are things to read, but the quality feels different from a narrative and storytelling perspective. And I think the downside to a lot of those early books was they didn't get finished. They were given chances and long runs, and I think Saga is probably the only one that has persisted since, outside of stuff that's already existed like Savage Dragon or Spawn. But I think now you get a chance, you get your 6 issues. If that does well, you continue on from there, but it has to stand out. And even when it stands out, maybe it's not to the same pedigree.
So what was your ultimate point of what you just said?
I'm just going back to answering the question: are there any past Marvel DC? But for me, it was past Image era that felt better than others, or compared to like the current output. Just MP's question.
Gotcha. Steve Matthews says if people use "not for me" rather than "I hate," we wouldn't be having this conversation. Well, "I hate" is also, a level that's beyond, like, to me, there's never a basis for that, right? Like, well, actually, no, there is. I hate the current Wonder Woman, but
Oh, yeah.
I love the art. The story I hate, the art I love. I feel comfortable saying that. Now, I would hate it if Tom King heard me say that, because he's the creator and that would suck. But guess what? I would never tag Tom King in a review or any place where I'm saying I hate the story of that book. But does that annihilate my right to say that?
Well, I think that's where you're doing something that a lot of people don't do. Like, you don't hate Tom King. In fact, you do like a lot of Tom King books.
I think Tom King is probably a great human. I've had great
Yeah.
interactions with him, and I think some of his books are some of the best that have been made in the last 20 years.
And I think that a lot that nuance is also lost on the internet a lot. The ability to separate the person making the book from the quality of the book. I might not like someone, or I might not like their book. I'm not gonna shit on them as a person, or be or having pitchforks to take him off the book, get rid of his paycheck for this, just so I can read something more comfortable for me. Like with Big Two, there will be a new creative team down the line. Just hold out hope. You'll get there eventually.
But I do think there is something to the language that's used. Like Sean and I do hate Wonder Woman and the writing in Wonder Woman, but we articulate that, and our feelings are strong, and we have repeatedly, said how much we dislike that book. But I think when other people love it so much, like there are some reviews where I think you can see it in Tyler. Tyler loves Wonder Woman, and you can see like the hate that we bring on it, the negative commentary that we have when we bring that on it, because we feel so strongly. Tyler tends to get a little bit beat down.
It sometimes makes me like it less.
Well,
So I have to cognizantly be cognizant of it.
And to that degree, I think that there is with people who don't have the same like level of like respect and that barrier of we're talking about an art piece here, and we have strong feelings about it, and between us we respect each other's opinions. When you don't have that, people's feelings get hurt and they take it in a way that you're like insulting their taste and you're telling them they're wrong. I think there is a harshness to the language that has evolved, maybe over the internet years. People have always said they hate stuff, but maybe not necessarily to such a nasty degree.
You
Nasty.
you you remove the criticism from it. I think that's the thing is you don't look at it from a uh you're only viewing it from that subjective perspective, and you don't introduce things that can help qualify that objective perspective, or that subjective perspective rather. You could dislike it, but it insofar as it becomes criticism, not outright or like abject derision. You're not out here canceling someone over a book, but you're talking about it from your perspective in a way that allows you to communicate the things that you find not working for it.
Amin Perez says people think they know the characters, but most likely they know and like a particular take on those characters. There's no official version of Spider-Man that you can compare the current run to. That's an interesting point. Comics are tough. Any sequential storytelling medium like this is going to have that kind of problem, because who's to say what the real version of any character is? What are the essential truths of a character? And if a new creative team comes on and they decide to add to those essential truths or flip them, is that still the same character? And everybody's going to have a different opinion on that, but that opinion is definitely going to color whether or not that run is considered to be good. I see nothing comparable to Wally West between the current Flash run and any other time I've seen that character. So to me, it doesn't feel like Wally West. It feels like Cy Spurrier is writing a science fiction story that he decided would include the Flash that doesn't have anything to do with the Flash. That's what that feels like. But if this is your first Flash run, how could you tell the difference? How would you know? That's Marco. Marco doesn't see anything wrong with the current Flash
Love it.
from a character standpoint.
Right, right. Because I'm forming that opinion, and it's being done through this run from a lens and from a perspective that I enjoy, and it's additive to that perspective of the character.
There was a comment I wanted to tackle. It was about ASM. Yeah, Revolutionary Dragon said, unless it's Amazing Spider-Man, then hope for new editors. Amazing Spider-Man is a great example, I think, of this. So, Amazing Spider-Man, if you ask the internet, is bad. It's a bad comic. It's not only is it bad, it's irredeemably bad. I couldn't disagree with that perspective more. But I am made of steel. I really do not give a fuck what other people think. I love to see what other people think. But does it penetrate me? No, I do not care. I am unoffended by people who dislike Amazing Spider-Man. It has no relevance to me whatsoever. Is the book actually bad? I don't know. Ask the 100K people a month that are buying it.
Yeah. And even when typically when we've reviewed it, like I feel like Cale and I in particular will comment on how the trappings don't allow us to enjoy the book as much as we probably could, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't have its artistic value. From a script perspective, it works. From an art perspective, it works. But there are small, maybe for us, inconsistencies or things that we don't enjoy about it, but it shouldn't take away from your enjoyment.
And also, Amazing Spider-Man is tricky because how do you critique it? Are you critiquing it per issue, by arc, by run? That those things change. If you critique it by issue, some of those JR ones are not his best. But if you critique it by arc, you can look at some of the arcs with Ed McGuinness. That's gorgeous art there. But then you can say, all right, let's expand outwards. Now we're doing the whole run. Is JRJR and McGuinness back and forth a little too jarring? Like, there are ways to critique this outside of, I don't like it, it's bad. That people.
But you
just
know
lose.
what people are talking about when they say it's bad, right?
There's still people still pissed off about the Paul Cucking situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, which, read the book and you could recognize there's more to it than that. Peter gets his licks in at some points too. So.
Oh, didn't know Marvel was doing that these days.
Oh yeah.
MP with another 5 spot. Thanks, MP. Are there ever runs where a creator puts so much of themselves into the characters that it becomes hard to criticize without criticizing the creator? That's an interesting question. I'm trying to think if there's a specific instance where I felt that way, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I can think of one.
Yeah,
especially when you're talking about big two. I think it's a little bit harder.
I think it becomes a little tricky because of Alan Moore's relationship to Watchmen, where, like, at least I know so much about it, it's a little hard to separate the two.
but even then, do you feel like, you're saying this thing about Dr. Manhattan doesn't work? Is that a criticism
No,
on
yeah.
Alan Moore? Like,
No, it's
I,
not.
I that's it's an interesting question. It's hard.
And even still, when you look at Watchmen, that's functionally independent, right? Like,
Right.
it's separate from the bigger universe that, the big two has created. It's not necessarily now, but it was, that book existed a place where Alan Moore could put, quote unquote, his politics, himself, inside that book, and it wouldn't manifest on Superman or whatever.
Maybe something like I've yet to read it, but like a Holy Terror and Frank Miller.
Fair.
Maybe that's something where there's enough of a person in that book at a specific time expressing something through art that they believe through the page, so much so that you have to question their ideology.
Nathan Chaffin, literally, as you said that, put in the chat, Frank Miller for sure. And I'm reminded of the the Dark Knight Strikes Again, where you can see 9/11 happen on the page. And
So Mike Elliott says the same argument for ASM applies to Wonder Woman. Okay. Then YARC9 says you hate that other people are liking Tom King's Wonder Woman because it's a good book. Tom King wrote Up in the Sky. I don't understand the unnecessary hate for talented writers. So let's put our listening comprehension caps on, okay? I do not hate the fact that other people like Wonder Woman. I actually love the fact that other people like Wonder Woman. Other people liking Wonder Woman has nothing to do with me. That is immaterial to me. When I am talking about what I think, and that's all. So other people not thinking that is cool. And if I were the only person on this podcast, I would never review Wonder Woman. Why? Because I'm going to come on here and say, I think it sucks every time. But because I'm not the only person here and there are other people who will feel differently than that, it means that you can get different perspectives. So that's the whole point.
And it's also important sometimes to compare those perspectives.
Exactly.
And
sometimes
it's
I
also,
wonder if you guys are picking up what we're putting down here.
It's also not impossible for a popular writer to not get every member of his audience. Not everyone bats 100.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Like, why is it that if you say, oh man, yeah, I don't like this book by Tom King, that makes you a hater? I'm not a Tom King hater, actually. Not even close.
I am.
Well,
I still don't know if that's a bit or not, Cale.
Hey man, have you met me? I've been doing this for 8 years. It's not a bit.
MRF 1983, what's up? Haven't seen your name before. Thank you for joining us. Says Tom King's writing is like that for me. Batman, Mr. Miracle, Martian Manhunter, Wally West, Flash, even Wonder Woman at the moment all feel like the same person to me.
And that's MRF 1983's opinion.
Yeah.
That's all right, man.
Matthias UI says, I don't like Tom King's stories. It's always about the same thing. And that's Matthias' opinion. And thank you for joining us and welcome. Appreciate you chatting. This is what I'm trying to get across. This is the whole point of the discussion. The question is, are modern comic books worse than the classics? The answer is obviously no, but that does not a discussion make. That is not interesting. The point is for us to come together and have a conversation about the way that we talk about the things that we love. If you don't like comics anymore, you're obviously disqualified from this conversation. Because how the fuck could you know?
Yeah.
Some people don't know that they don't like comics anymore, though, because comics is such a ritualistic thing for some people. It's a thing they do on Wednesday.
But again, like that's part of the evolution. That's part of looking at yourself, you know, like there's more to that than you don't like comics.
I know, and like it's getting there. But the fact that if you're in that boat, self-examine, see why you don't like comics, see why you don't like the comics you're reading. Like it is such a like, all right, I hit this feeling, I hit this step, and I stop there. There's a lot of a lack of going deeper on the way people feel about books, how they feel about books, how they talk about books. It's like a stopgap for some people that I think just keep pushing.
It's like tripping on a curb, but not looking down to see that you tripped on a curb. Every day you trip on this curb, you stub your toe and you trip on this curb, but you never go, wow, damn, I should stop. I should look down and step over the curb.
Sometimes I trip on a curb and I say, damn editors.
Ricky B says Big Two are doing bad ever since All New, All Different and their DEI policy. But in the end, money talks and hopefully go back to quality. So, right. This is an example, Ricky B. I'm sorry that you have to be the example, but this is the example of the kind of opinion that I feel comfortable disqualifying. Because if you actually believe that the reason that Big Two comics are bad is because of quote unquote DEI, which is diversity. What is it? Diversity,
equality, diversity, equality, inclusion.
Yeah, some shit like that. Basically, the idea that there are more black, brown, and women characters in the comics. If that's what you think, then there's nothing to that. That cannot possibly be the case. If you automatically see Sam Wilson Cap and say, "Oh, DEI, oh, these comics suck now," and you brought up a very specific era, All New, All Different. That's when a lot of characters got changed around, and then we had Sam, and we had X-23 Wolverine, and we had, the Mighty Thor. If those types of things turn you out from comics, then you got to find something else. And I don't know what you're going to find for you. Like, it sounds like maybe the Cyberfrog territory is more your boat. And this definitely isn't the show for you if that describes you.
And here's the thing, All New, All Different, you can critique that from an actual standpoint, like the lack of staying with those books and the quick change from it. The never having ongoing series. Like, there are ways to critique even such areas like that, but just throwing a buzzword out there because that's what people told you to feel is not nuance. It's not actually engaging with why you don't like something. Like, Falcon's been around longer than that guy's possibly been around, but been born, like this character has been there for forever. He's not an inclusion hire. He's been there since what, 70s? Falcon?
Yeah.
So like, that's just a lack of critical thinking.
Or just admit you're a racist. Who cares?
Me?
If you're just racist, just say that. Don't say that comics are bad because of DEI. That's a cop-out. I respect someone who just comes out and says, look, I don't like black people, so I'm not reading a comic book with a black person in it. I respect that because it's honest. But don't tell me it's because of DEI, because that's horseshit. There is no policy at Marvel or DC to specifically have X amount of black characters. If there was, we would have more than 0 current ongoings at DC that feature black characters. That is bullshit. Just say you're racist. That's all.
Cale, thank you for being the DI hire for the Comic Spouse, though. I appreciate it.
Hey, listen, anytime.
Yeah.
Anytime.
Souls in
happy to be
2000 says it right. I agree with that. If the story is good, the story is good, DEI or not. Get out of your own head with that horse shit. You cannot read all of those stories that were coming out during All New, All Different and tell me that they're all bad. That's not true. There's no way. There's no way. And the fact that you would say DEI before you talk about the quality of the story shows what you're really saying.
It also, like, when you blame a company and their mysterious policies, like, it reeks of conspiracy.
National Enquirer at the
Yeah.
checkout counter. Yeah.
That boy's running DC, and that's why there are so many Bat titles.
Well, actually, I heard Dan Slott's going to DC and he's introducing Batboy, actually.
Oh, Steve Matthews. We weren't talking about you, bud. We weren't. That wasn't about you.
Yeah, you're good.
You're good. You're good. No worries there. Matthias brings up a great point. I wonder if they launch Milestone now, would people think that's DEI? Well, we saw the response to the Milestone relaunch, and unfortunately, it kind of died on the vine. Part of that is due to a lack of support on DC's part, but I also think part of it is, the audience seeing, a line of comics that is dedicated to black characters and going, oh, DEI. And that's horseshit.
Yeah, dismissive out the gate.
Yeah, that's horseshit.
And I would just hope, like, if you're engaging in comics to the point where you're on a podcast live talking about it, you should at least want to like things, right? And want to enjoy what you're reading. Why wouldn't you want to engage and evolve with the medium to do that? Instead of saying, well, I don't like it, DEI, not my thing. Why not pick the white dude book out of All New, All Different? I think there was a white Captain America at that point, right? As well?
Well, he was old, so it was different.
Okay. All right. That's another DEI, the elderly.
That's right. Yeah, veteran inclusion.
Yep. Veteran inclusion. No, they love that.
Trust me, Marvel loves it.
I mean, the Earth is flat, bro. I don't know what you're talking about.
Aye.
Actually, that guy should maybe read Department of Truth. You'll enjoy that one.
Phantom Flame, that's another new name. So many new names. I love to see it. If you're a lurker, I'm not telling you what to do. Enjoy your lurk if that's what you do. But if you want to break lurk, you're making me happy. I love to see it. So thank you, Phantom Flame. Phantom says, I think comics are bad because they don't have an evolving plot, don't keep character development, split brands, invent too many new characters. Things change, but they keep resetting to a status quo, as well as changing art styles too often. And don't make it easy to know what's happening to a character.
Yeah.
There's something to that.
I think the consistency of art style is one of those things that we've talked about pretty consistently most recently on Ultimate Spider-Man. The fact that you have Marco Cicchetto on for a while and then gets swapped out, then you bring back another set of career artists. It becomes something that you can, in good faith, critique there, because you want a long-running consistency both from an art as well as a writing perspective. The evolving plot piece and returning back to a certain, like, rubber banding back to a certain thing, I think is the nature of superhero comics, the big two. And so there you have to come in with that kind of expectation that it will ultimately come back. And yes, you can critique the way that it does so but I think there's also part of an expectation on that end.
Well, I don't even need to dissect everything Phantom Flame said. The fact that it is talking about craft,
yeah,
as opposed to buzzwords or the creators involved. This is actual. It's like a PowerPoint presentation. Like here are the things that need to change. And I can respect that. That is critique that I can respect. Even though he said comics are bad, that I disagree with as a large swath. But at least dude came with some receipts that were legit.
Criticisms, real criticisms.
Yeah.
And I think that also in that I hear the medium of comics is not really big too, is not for me. obviously, in my mind, if this person were to read outside of the big two, a lot of those problems don't exist. Like consistency in art style, typically the artist who starts a non-big two run is the one that ends it, no matter how long the book is. That's pretty standard. But comics aren't for everybody. Like comics welcome everybody, but not everybody is going to like the medium of comics. Just like not everybody likes to read books. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. My problem is not with people who say those things, because if you can admit that comics aren't for you, then aces. But if you think they are, but yet everything that comes out sucks, then clearly they've passed you by. And I think that is one of the biggest things you have to be willing to accept. You have to be willing to accept that for whatever reason, something has passed you by and is no longer for you. And that doesn't always have to be a negative thing about the industry itself. It's just like the people who can't get over how popular and successful the MCU is. Well, guess what, buddy? A lot of people like these movies. Just because you don't doesn't mean that they're bad. That actually has nothing to do with whether they're good or not. It's just another man or person's opinion. Brian Harry says, the creation of new characters is a tricky topic. People complain they want something new, but when new characters come out, they don't like it because it's too different. There has to be a happy a happy medium. And I think that's true too. But guess what? Brian, and thank you for the comment. Appreciate seeing a new name. Most of the time, a new anything is going to die on the vine. Think about this. Think about this fact, right? There are over 100 new comic book releases just between the big two every single week. Or, I'm sorry, every month. That doesn't include anything that comes out from any other publisher.
Yeah.
How many of all those comics are good? How many of the new characters that come out of those comics are good? How many of them are successful? How many of them can sell more than 50,000 copies?
If that.
Exactly.
Well, would you consider sales to be whether things are good or not?
Yes, because I think that ultimately the market determines whether or not something has value. And if the market is saying that something doesn't have value, then there must be something about it that is not allowing it to sell, because I believe that the cream rises to the top.
And I think, but I think that includes stuff that the market comes too late. Just because, like, think about Omega Man.
Yeah.
That only got a certain amount of issues, and then it was canceled. But that's hailed as a pretty classic, defining run that wasn't respected in its time.
Yeah, I have trouble with whether or not it being with sales consider like sales equals good in my eyes. I don't think that's the case, especially with the way sales works in comics. People pick up books because they've always picked up books, regardless of the fact that it's good. Spider-Man,
Yeah.
like Spider-Man, I think Spider-Man's good right now, but just because it's at the top of the chain of sales, I don't think necessarily means it's good. I think that also disqualifies books that maybe don't have the backing of major corporations to sell it or establish IP to sell it. So that doesn't compute for me.
Again, with the Amazing Spider-Man comparison, it's the best-selling comic pretty much every single week. If anybody doesn't think that that is a measure of people's enjoyment of it, they're flat out wrong. It is what it is.
But I also think this is a business,
Yeah.
and if the good stuff doesn't sell, then it has to be put on the shelf, or
It's not for the market.
And maybe the market will find it, but it's only going to be in a limited, quantity.
Yeah.
But also it's selling because it's there and people recognize who it is as well. Like McDonald's, I don't think McDonald's is good, but it sells a lot.
But
Because
who
it's
are you
easier.
to say whether McDonald's is good? The shit tastes good.
Comparatively.
No, come on. Like,
Millions and millions and millions and millions of people enjoy it.
I mean, but it is by corporation designed to taste like there's reasons for it tasting like
It
that.
doesn't matter what the
But-
reason is. There's reasons why Amazing Spider-Man tastes good.
But just because a book doesn't sell Amazing Spider-Man numbers doesn't mean it's not good. Like, what's
Of
the
course
difference?
not. There's only one spot for the #1 book, but that's not the only measure. I'm not judging an Image Comics sales against ASM. Those are on different tiers.
So, like, if a book's not in out of the, I'm just trying to think of the inverse here. If you're saying books that sell a lot are good, if it's in the like if it's number 26 on the charts, does that mean it's less good?
Tyler, I'm giving you the exact case study.
Go ahead.
Omega Men was this case study.
Oh, and I agree with you, Cale. Yeah, that's
Then
why I'm pushing back on Sean. Like, I was agreeing with you, Cale.
But I'm agreeing with Sean. Like, we're saying the same thing.
Well,
Like,
I'm just saying that sales does not equal good because Omega Men didn't sell well and it was still good.
But selling, go ahead.
But sales are also a subjective
Sure.
measure. You know, Marvel decides that ASM can keep going because it sells well, whether it's good or not.
It has more opportunity
DC
to be good as well.
DC decided that Omega Men couldn't cut the mustard, even though it was good. It didn't have the sales, so they had to cut it.
Well, I think it's the lens of the market versus a person's taste, and I don't think that those necessarily are equivalent. And the market's deciding that in this case, in the immediate, Omega Man wasn't great. It started to sell out a little bit later, and in the case of Amazing Spider-Man, it sells now, and I think those are independent of the quality of the book, but the value that it provides to a reader.
And also, like, Omega Men is not getting the same push with news that Spider-Man would get. If Spider-Man's on a new creative team, you have that on the websites and stuff. Omega Men probably got a solicit, especially with Tom King at the time. He wasn't too well known. So, like, my eyes, like, did Transformers, the first movie, saw a lot? Sure it did. It's Transformers. But was it good? No, it was Michael Bay.
I loved it. Who are you to say it wasn't good? You just spent, Tyler, the early portions of this conversation saying that good is subjective, and now you're it's no, hold on. It's always based on what you like or don't like.
Sure.
So you can't say Transformers isn't good then.
Well, I can expand upon it because that's what we're talking about. It's not saying things are good or bad. It's expanding upon that. I didn't
You
like
just said it.
because you cut me off before I could even finish because you found some blood in the water and you jumped at it.
No, come on. All right, let's go. Let's.
It's just nonstop. Black Panthro says, I don't get the ASM hate. I've been reading it regularly for almost a decade and a half after a short break from comics. Some stumbles, but overall, I'm here. Yeah. And that's cool.
MP's got a 10 spot.
Oof. Thank
He
you.
really wants us to shut up. Recognizing when a character isn't your version anymore is key. My Batman is post-crisis Batman when O'Neill was editor, but I still enjoy the Morrison, Zdarsky, etc., even though it's definitely not my Batman.
Yeah. I mean, my Batman is Morrison's Batman, but I still just love reading Batman stories. It's kind of like, for me at least, it's kind of like being a fan of wrestling. I have been watching wrestling since 1997. I love the WWE. I probably haven't enjoyed the WWE much, like up until the last couple of years. I probably didn't enjoy it much for about 10 years. If you ask me what I think about the decade between 2012 and 2022, I would say most of the WWE sucked. Most of it was not good. I watched it every single week. It doesn't matter if it's good or not. It's because I want to see it. It's not my era. You know, for some kids, that's their era. That's all they know. But I know better, and to me, that sucked. But it's still WWE. I'm still going to watch it. Just like comics. I'm always going to read Marvel and DC comics, unless they switch to digital or trade first. But other than that,
It's a different conversation.
Yeah, that's a completely different conversation. But ultimately, I'm always going to read it. Boss Rendier says sales are more related to marketing and brand recognition than if it's good or not. Being good can help, but it's not the be all end all of sales. Sure, it's not. But Immortal Hulk outsold Batman.
Wouldn't that just be I guess because it's that good. Like it's a qualifier for it being that good. It's the inverse. Like I don't disagree with you, Sean. A good comic will sell. The inverse is what bothers me because that feels very definitive in my eyes. Like that in my eyes, like
What's the inverse of a good comic won't a good comic will sell? That a bad comic won't sell?
well, I guess that is the real inverse. But the fact that it
Yeah.
needs to be a good comic to sell is what in my eyes it is.
Yeah. Dan dropped a 5 spot and said this discussion reminds me of the Jack Kirby quote. I don't have all the answers, but I've enjoyed the questions. I'm grateful for the questions. Thanks so much, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.
Dan's dropping in multiple quotes in this chat that are pretty good.
I don't have all the answers, but I've enjoyed the questions. Right. Sure. Yeah. Exactly. And that's why we show up every morning or every Saturday morning to talk this shit. Ultimately, look, I think that everybody who has a desire to read comics, and by desire, I mean a passion for it, a love for it. You know, these kinds of conversations are the conversations that I would hope we would all be open to have. Because as individuals, we make up the market. You know, we can't discuss the market as this ethereal thing. The market is us. We are the individuals who buy the comics. So we determine what sells and what doesn't sell. And the way we discuss those things can have a direct impact on that. Because I know that when we do pals polls and, you know, Marco says, oh, I really like such and such book, there's some amount of our audience who goes out and buys it off Marco's word. But if Tyler says, I don't like this book, there's some amount of our audience that says, I'm going to pass or I'm going to trade weight that. So we have influence. And it's not just us, it's you guys too. Because if one of you on our Discord server says, oh man, you know, that most recent issue of XYZ just didn't hit, someone else is going to see that. And the way that you said that will matter to that person.
That affects me. That affects me.
That is literally why I don't engage with comic book YouTube before Pals Polls. I don't want it to affect me because of that. I want to come in clean with my own opinions and stuff.
Mike Elliott, who's in the chat right now, specifically, I asked him his opinion on Daredevil, the current Daredevil. His opinion wasn't so hot, so I dropped it because I wasn't caught up, and I was like, is this worth reading? He's like, I don't know, it's not too great. So I said, okay, I'm done with this.
Yeah, the Kefis had a first issue in the book in the Discord that I was interested in, but off his word, I know we have similar tastes. I'm like, oh, okay, actually, not for me, man.
That is the power that we all have over each other. It really matters what you say. Immortal Hulk outsold Batman because enough people said, oh shit, this is good. And enough people heard that to go out and buy it.
And enough people heard it from websites, from podcasts, from YouTube, where there's buzz around it. And honestly, with comics, that's about as much marketing as you're going to get.
Gino France Jr. says comics are great no matter what era. It all depends on sales. I don't think you can really point to a specific era and just say objectively it's all bad. But I certainly think you can point to eras and say, things weren't great. You know, we always point to the 90s. I did earlier. I said the 90s were rough for comics. And obviously the industry almost collapsed, so argue with yourself. But within that, there are gems. Me saying that, there's someone hearing my voice right now that's going to say Sean's full of shit because I really enjoyed X. But people do the opposite of that as well. People will say, "Oh, the whole industry sucks right now because I don't like this."
Yep. Extrapolate.
Exactly. It's very difficult for people to look at the whole of something. And if you think the whole is bad, then you shouldn't be a part of it. Michael Nadeau says, y'all turn me on to Birds of Prey. I'm glad we could spread that gospel for you. Guess what? Go ahead, Cale.
But well, look at this. You just turned Letrix and Ahmed Perez off XYZ.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Like, look at what you've done.
Stick with it. It gets better after the 12th issue.
Use your power for good, Sean.
I try.
I mean, I think we're all cool with preaching the gospel of Big Barda on the show. So,
Indeed.
Well, hey, yeah, listen, this is
The
the
good
Kelly
book.
Thompson Power Hour.
Yeah.
Yep, as often as possible. MP says 90s for Marvel and Image, perhaps, but I think DC was pretty strong in the 90s. So there you go. Immediate feedback. Dan says championing great work is the greatest service a critic provides. That's an interesting perspective. I'm not sure if I agree that that's the greatest service a critic provides. I feel like the greatest service a critic provides is telling the truth about what they think.
Yeah, sharing their perspective with the world, so somebody has something to bounce off of. I'm as much a sounding
Sharing
board.
a perspective.
Yeah.
I don't actually think that I'm correct about my opinion on pretty much any book. I don't care if you think I am. I'm here to talk to you about it. And you're here to listen.
And that's it. That's the Comics Pals ethos. We're not right, but we want to talk about it.
Welcome to Pals Pools. Tune in 6 p.m. EST.
Except Wonder Woman. I do think I'm right about Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
I just like to bust chops. I'm not serious. Poing333, there's a name, says, I love the hole. I think the hole is great. Every hole. Every hole, you don't discriminate.
Hey, yo.
I mean, I'm at the point too, Poing. I'm
Now-
with you.
Poing is a true champion.
Right. He's not closed off to anything.
My man loves hole.
You
Nuts.
go to stall 3 at the James Gandolfini rest stop in Jersey.
Come on.
That is
Specific stall 3.
Well, I mean,
that is vile.
they have the best duct tape.
That is wild. Oh my goodness. G-Town Comics, another new name. Thank you for chatting. Says, wasn't Marvel Knights in the late 90s? It probably was.
So.
And there you go. Marvel was falling apart, almost near complete destruction, but they were publishing Marvel Knights.
Vertigo
There's probably-
existed then too, you know.
Probably
And
good.
you gotta think too, like even that, like Marvel Knights, Ultimate Spider-Man started in, the late 90s to early aughts. Like even in rough eras, like stuff starts to come out of that, that ushers in a new era.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we take
And
the
I-
low periods. No,
I want to say, like, every shifting decade, you're gonna lose people and you're gonna gain people. The Krakoan era of X-Men comics brought a lot of new people into the fold, but there were also a lot of people who said, I'm out. This ain't for me. This ain't my time.
Yep.
That's comics, baby.
welcome, Get Shitty. First time catching live, and I come into, quote, every hole. That gets a like. Welcome
Get
to the
Shitty.
show.
As many times as I've responded to your comments on YouTube, we better get a fucking like. We
A like
better
and a
get a
share.
like.
We
Yeah,
done
and a
got-
share.
We done got shitty. All right.
MP says, as a test example, DC clearly thought they needed to do something big leading into New 52. Do you think the state of late 2000s DC was down era? So it's hard for me to comment on that too much because that was not an era where I was reading like a lot of DC. So I'll leave the definitive answer to that to people who are more informed. But I can say that having read a lot of interviews from people who were there at that time, the internal belief was that it was. And they were told they needed to do something different. And they did.
And I can be a poster child for this part of the conversation. Like 2000s DC was right where I was reading. 2000s to, up to New 52. Like, that's my spot. I was loving it.
Yeah, Cry for Justice. You love that stuff, right?
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Wow. Oh shit. Phantom Flame says, for examples of Darcy's Batman run, not everyone enjoys it, but I buy those books because I want to see what happens next. Hold on. Hold on, Phantom Flame. Didn't you just say like 20 minutes ago that comics are bad because of all reasons?
That's why I think comic fans are a specific breed where, like, even if they don't like them, they're still buying them.
I love it. I
Well,
love it. I
just-
want to know. Go ahead.
just above that, let me complete their thought here. Phantom Flame says, my thing has always been this. I prefer when issues have more long arcs because I feel like the character is escalating and it leads me to want to know what is happening next and what came before.
Caught in the
So he
middle of
wants
an
to
arc.
exist in the context of everything that came before him. Got it.
Man, I really, really love to see the variation in opinion in the chat. This is the place that I wanted us to arrive at, where everybody is being very honest about what they think about the state of comics and what they like and what they don't. It's not always hunky-dory. Like, we're a positive podcast, we lean positive, but don't assume that we don't have, things about this or that we're not happy with. We wouldn't be real people if we didn't come on here and be honest with you guys about what we think is happening. And why would you want to hear us if we weren't? MP says, should we do a poll? A poll on what? On DC at the
he
time?
wants us to show
Are
poll.
comics good right now?
Oh, let's do a poll.
Are
that's
comics
very-
better now than they have been?
Yeah, so let's do a poll that's very binary on a discussion where we talked about how nuance is important in this discussion.
That's the
bro.
point, Tyler.
I love it.
got you.
Yeah,
I
Marco,
love
show
it.
poll real quick.
Yeah. Excuse me, let me stand up.
Oh man, Revolutionary Dragon. Oh, I have a question from Revolutionary Dragon that I don't think will be a long conversation, but I do want to talk about it. They say right now, is it bad that Cry for Justice was my first trade ever? Yeah, sorry, dude.
You should have just stopped reading
That's
comics at the
rough.
beginning. That's a bad start,
I
man.
can't believe that kept you.
That's
I
like
almost stopped reading DC at that point.
that's like in Mario Kart when you start off wrong and then you start spinning out immediately.
Yeah.
And I hold that A button for too long.
Yeah, man.
Earlier, way earlier, Revolutionary Dragon but asked the question, creators are holding out ideas from DC and Marvel for their own creator owned stories. And that was attached to another comment, but I really wanted to drill down on that point.
I think that's tricky because when I think of something like that, I think of Kieran Gillen. Because we just read the Power Fantasy, right? That's Kieran Gillen, and we can see in Power Fantasy how the influence of his run on X-Men previous to that might have led to this. I think that is diluting the idea of ideas. I think ideas can evolve. I don't think it's just like, all right, I got this one in a box, I got this one in a box. A lot of the time they're more nebulous and things can show up in individual things, or a piece of it could be here, a piece of it could be here. That being said, I'm sure there are characters that maybe people have ideas for that they don't want to give to Marvel or create new characters for Marvel because they don't have the ownership over them.
Yeah, I can see that part of the conversation, but I also think that no creator that works at Marvel and DC isn't gonna go whole hog on putting something on the page. Okay.
I completely agree because I think, I don't know, I think if you're a creative person, then you can understand that if you're in that position, all you want to do is the best work you can do.
Yeah.
And it would be very hard to hold something back if that something would serve your story and enhance it. Most creators are not going to do that.
And, you know, there are always other aspects of an idea that you can twist and mold to fit a different part, to fit a different story.
Especially with comics, where you don't know where your next paycheck's going to be. Every book is a tryout, really, for the next book.
Yeah, and in any creative medium, if you don't sell, you don't sell. So you have to do the best work you could possibly do. And MRF actually asked a question that I think is adjacent to this about sales slash quality of a book. When does art start slash stop being art? If you make something for self-expression, it's your art. But does it become something less art and more product the moment you sell it? I think that's an interesting question. And there could probably be a lot more of a nuanced conversation about that. But just for the sake of answering your question, I think the answer is that once something is commercial, it's not that it becomes less art, it's just that it becomes less yours, in the sense that now it is open to the interpretation of everybody who views it. Like, I could say, for example, that I don't believe this, obviously. I could say that Zeb Wells is phoning it in on Amazing Spider-Man. I could say that, right? But Zeb Wells knows, wait a second, I haven't seen my kids. I haven't been spending time with my family. You know, I haven't been working out. I haven't been doing the things that I need to do for my life because I want to tell the best stories that I can with Amazing Spider-Man. So think about the difference. I say he's phoning it in. He says, I'm working harder on this than I am on anything else in my life.
I think they're not mutually exclusive, art and being a commercial product. They can be both. I don't think one being, I don't think being commercial doesn't mean it's not art. Art is open for subjectivity, even if it's in an art gallery in the middle of, the Village in New York City, where like maybe a dozen people walk in and see it. That's art. But so is Amazing Spider-Man, where hundreds of thousands of people read it. Also art. So I don't think it is less art because of sales or because of it being commercial. It's still art.
I think the most immediately commercial thing is a commission. Like you pay somebody to purchase their piece of art. They have to make a living, and them commodifying their talent, I don't think diminishes the talent or its artistic value. I buy commissions from artists. I'm the only one that sees them, and for me, it's being able to see the craft and construction of that, and the fact that they sold it to me is only me supporting that artist because I value their work so well.
And it's one of one at that point.
It is only ever one of one.
I think that the difference between art and a product is really just that a product means money was exchanged. Art will always be there to be experienced one way or the other, even if it's only for one person. If you're making art, your goal is to have it be experienced.
Even if nobody sees it. Like I'm sure you guys, you doodle, you make comics, right, Cale? At the same time, like you do comics that you made it on the Patreon. If you want to check that out, there's something on there on the Patreon. But even if I doodle on a napkin, I draw a stick figure. I draw a polar bear because I like drawing animals sometimes. That's still art. It still has artistic value, even though nobody else has seen it besides me. Even if I crumble it up and I throw it in the garbage, that's just crumbled up art, but it's still art.
Samuel Summer says, I really love modern comics. My favorite books are Radiant Black, Gunslinger Spawn, and Moon Knight. You want to know something, Samuel? I'm not reading a single one of those books. In fact, I was at varying points and I dropped them all. But I will tell you this. I love the fact that for you, those are your favorites. It goes to show the diversity that can be possible, the wide array of emotions and feelings that we can all have. And it goes to show you that all these books being published is valid. And we're lucky that this can happen. I consider myself super, super, super lucky that as somebody who's inclined to like comics, that I get to engage with them and that there are so many good ones. Even the good ones that I don't like. So ultimately, we're all lucky. We should all be happy. And we should all love comics, even if you don't love them all.
Damn it.
And the result of the poll, we're going to close that up now. And Marco, you give us the results, please.
Got with a resounding 78%. Hell yeah, comics are good right now. To a 21%, nah.
Wow. You know what? I appreciate the honesty. We gave you a binary choice, and you said, "Listen, okay."
Nah, I'm gonna do my own thing.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And I would like to ask, and we're not gonna get into we're gonna move the show forward, but I would like to ask to those of you who said no, why do you still engage with the medium? And if you don't continue to continuously read comics, do you listen to our show? And if you do, why is that? I'm curious. It's not an antagonistic question. I want to know. I'm very curious about that. I appreciate Steve Matthews. You're trying to drop a bomb.
I know.
You're trying to drop a bait bomb, and we're going to brush right past that. Steve Matthews said, so is AI comics also art? And buddy, that is a landmine that I am stepping right over.
He knows us. He's baiting us on purpose.
I see it.
Shit, CW Gordon is hopping right in there, stoking the flames.
I see it. So, yeah, thank you guys so much for all the engagement. You guys have been great throughout this. I love the conversation. I love the honesty. I'm so glad that we have curated an audience where we can have a conversation like this and get answers that aren't just the run-of-the-mill basic answer on either side of the spectrum. That's the point. I wouldn't want it any other way. So thank you guys for that. We've got a lot more show to do, as I teased at the top, so don't you think about going anywhere. We're going to talk more DC because DC moved back to Wednesdays, and there's a chance that that might actually not have been the best decision. We've got updates on Daniel Warren Johnson's time on Transformers. We're going to talk about a new publisher that entered the comic space. So we've got a lot of things to get into. Before we move on to all of that, I do want to talk to you about patreon.com/thecomicsmouse, where if you enjoyed this conversation and you want to contribute to the cause, our cause of, keeping the lights on and being able to do all the fun things that we get to do for you guys, this is a podcast that is sponsored by you. So thank you to everybody that supports us on Patreon or chooses to become a channel member. Y'all are the MVPs of this podcast, not us, because you make it possible. So thank you. With that thanks, of course, also comes perks. One of those, among many that you can find on our page, is being able to join the Palsverse. And as you guys know, every single week, our Palsverse members get a nickname and a shout out on this very show. So I'm going to speed through the this week's editions, or not just editions, but this week's shout outs, because there are so many now. So I want to give a special shout out to our Palsverse legends. Thunderstruck Rebecca Alejandro, the Hound of Justice Atomic Hound, who is in the chat, Starcross Catherine Stars, who is in the chat, the Red Spiral Spiral Storm, Orseus the Waterbound. And I want to thank these Palsverse members, the Night Stalker Harris Nijinsky, Brian Demolisher Del Pozo, Kefis the Incorruptible, Momentum Mike Elliott, who was in the chat, Dan the Truth Trudeau, who was in the chat, Jalen the Sanguine Sorcerer, Marley Manastorm, Slowflow Dameron, Christian Uncaged Harriet, Always Laughing, the Spear of Justice, Izzy Spears, the Great Destroyer Hyper Viper 89, Adam and Bernie the Best Boy, Robert Run It Back Kashabak, Pete the Dreamweaver Collins, Matthew Malice Price, James Just Jamming Jones, who was in the chat, Amin Almighty Perez in the chat, Paul Powerhouse Smith, Andrew the Galaxian Smith, Neon Knight the Cosmic Avenger, Matthew the Shade Sadler, BJ Kicks, and joining the Palsverse, a new entry. I'm very happy to introduce you to the Living Blade, Boss Rundir.
Come on.
Boss Rundir sits alone in his father's room, surrounded by his father's things. It had been a long time since Boss was in this room. Not since he was a boy, in fact. He could remember his father's smile from those days very vividly, the countless times they played together. Mom would always tell them to stop roughhousing, and his dad would yell at her that that's just what boys do. Boss could also remember the day things changed. He remembered the look in his father's eyes the day Boss was sent to live with his grandmother a couple of hours away. He could see the pain in his father's eyes, which made it all the more confusing that his father wanted him to go. Did his parents not love him anymore? That uncertainty would haunt Bass for the rest of his life. The fear of being abandoned again kept him from building deep relationships with people. And he never did work up the courage to have a heart-to-heart with his dad about why he sent him away. Pity that, because now it was too late. His father was dead, and all that remained of him was this house, these things, all of which now belonged to Boss. How could he live under this roof with the unresolved questions still gnawing at him? To make matters worse, there was the note his father had left him. Boss picked it up off the nightstand to read it once again, wanting to make sure he hadn't missed anything, but to say he was confused by what he read was an understatement. Son, I know that things haven't turned out how you wanted. Trust that they've not gone how I envisioned either. Wish that I had more time to say all that's on my mind, that I might see you once more and say what's on my heart. But truthfully, it's better this way. Much as I wish it, there's no telling that I'd be able to speak as myself. The most important thing I'll ever tell you is this, son. In my closet, you'll find a case. Inside is a sword, a blade of immeasurable power. You must destroy it. Do not give it away. Do not leave it where others might acquire it. And whatever you do not touch it. Touching that blade is my life's biggest regret because of what it stole from me. Do not make your father's mistakes. Boss's eyes filled with tears. He'd read the note a dozen times, but he was stuck on just one thing. Why didn't his father end it by saying he loved him? Angered, he balled up the letter and marched to the closet. He swung the door open and dug through the racks of clothes. Almost hidden in the back of the walk-in was the case his father had mentioned. It was plain black and unassuming. Boss took the case out of the closet and laid it on the ground. His father's written words played in his ears, and he heard them in his father's deep voice. Whatever you do not touch it.
Don't do it, man.
He undid the latches and opened the case. Before him was indeed a sword. It didn't look special to him at all. In fact, it looked old and rusted. What could be so dangerous about this? Maybe his father had lost a bit of himself in his final days? Boss took a breath and made a choice. He grabbed the blade by its hilt. His world changed forever. Suddenly, he felt overcome with power, a deep sense that he was stronger, that this blade was powerful, and because he held it, so was he. The blade too transformed. No longer did it look old. Now it became imposing, sharp, and glowed, an almost mesmerizing black and white. Then he heard it. Son, what have you done? I told you not to touch the sword. It was the voice of Bass's father. How could that be? You will not be able to speak to me. I cannot hear your thoughts, and there is limited time. So listen to your father now before it's too late. You need to get rid of this blade before you become intoxicated by it. When the others come through, it will be too late. You need to destroy it now. Boss was overwhelmed. How could he destroy this weapon? Who were the others? Why could he hear his father's voice? Had he lost his mind? Boss Rendier, do you recognize my voice? It's your grandfather. Boss sat on his father's bed, blade in hand, eyes wide open. How could he be hearing not only his father, but his grandfather? You didn't heed your father's warning. That's good. He doesn't understand that this is what we must do. Through this blade, we will carve our family's legacy into the history of this world, taking the lives of those who would seek to stand in our way. Legacy? This has nothing to do with your family or any legacy. This has to do with us carving a bloody path through the world and becoming the king of it. I couldn't fulfill that in my lifetime, but you will. For all of us. Whose voice was that? Boss didn't recognize it. Soon the voices were coming in so fast and so loud that Boss felt like he was losing his mind. Not only could he hear the voices, but he could feel their influence. Dozens of voices, people inside of him vying for him to do their bidding. Some wanted him to kill, some wanted him to protect the innocent, and some still wanted him to leave the blade behind entirely. But one knew better now that it was too late. Boss heard the voice of his father only once more that night. Boss, I wish you had heeded my warning. It's too late for you now, son. You have only one option left. Fight through the voices, take the blade, and use it on yourself. End this now, son. You will not be strong enough to resist it. I wasn't. That's why I had to send you away. Please, boss, do yourself a favor and kill yourself. At that moment, the blade disappeared, but it disappeared inside of Boss's body. It enveloped itself inside of him. Now he, the blade, and all of the voices and people inside of it were one. Which of those would have the most influence over Boss's actions? His father, his grandfather, any of the dozens of others, or himself? Boss will find out soon enough, and it may not be the answer he wants to hear. But it's too late. He made his choice.
Damn, now
Thank you,
he
boss.
is the living blade. Hot
Can't
fire.
hear you, Cale.
Dan, I think, has the perfect summation here. He says, if he was a good dad, he'd know forbidding your kid to do something is the best way to ensure they do it.
Boss Rendier, I really hope you enjoyed that. I had a lot of fun writing it. I welcome to the Palsverse, my friend.
I like that there were moments of looking through the chat. People were, touch the blade. No, don't go for it. Other people were just like, do it.
Those are the voices
Amazing.
that he has to deal with.
That's right. Yeah, that's
Right.
right.
Is the chat in his head? Is that his power? Chat's in his head?
Boy, if
I've been
that
there
were the
before.
case, we would be the living blades.
Bro, I got blackout drunk one time and I started talking to the chat, even though I was in public. It's like, chat, is this real? I was apparently very gone.
Wow.
So I've been in a living blade situation, I guess.
Chat seems to have enjoyed that. I really, really appreciate the love. That means more to me than you guys could imagine. So thank you. Boss Rondier himself says, dude, that was awesome. Thanks a lot, Sean. I really enjoyed that. You are so, so welcome. Thank you for your contributions. It's the least I can do. It's the least we can do. So thank you very much. And then Dan says, might be your best one yet. Wow, thank you. That's very high praise coming from you.
One thing I really want to compliment you, Sean, is as you're crafting villains, truly each one feels like a step up from the next, and they all have like massive, massive implications. I don't envy the circle you're gonna have to close at some point.
Well, that's gonna be our job. That's gonna be our job for later. And then also I want to thank Chop Harder Alchemist, who has also joined our Patreon. Unfortunately, buddy, I'm so sorry. I have a lot happening in my personal life, and I just couldn't get to yours, but you will absolutely have yours next week. Promises. Again, really appreciate all of the thanks. You guys are amazing. I wish I could get to all of your comments about it, but I really thank you. I don't get to do this in a professional manner. So this is my creative outlet. So thank you guys.
Gore Vidal, just to walk outside the story just for a second. Gore Vidal says you have a good reading voice. So
thank you.
There you go.
Thank you. I always thought I had a voice and a face for radio. So all right. Oh, go ahead, Tyler.
I was just gonna say, hey now.
All right. It is Marvel Event Month. And I want to let you guys know before we talk about our top 5 Marvel events that this Tuesday is our Annihilation book club. Yes, Annihilation won the book club poll by a landslide. It really wasn't competitive. You guys really, really want us to read Annihilation. And it was more votes than we've ever had. So thank you for that.
Sean, would you say the other options were annihilated?
Yes, I would, Tyler.
Okay.
Yes, I would.
That's why they pay me the big bucks.
So set your watches to it. Tuesday at 6 p.m. we will be live with you to discuss the cosmic event that people talk about as being even greater than the event that was happening adjacent to it at the same time, Civil War, that I have never read before. So I'm very excited to dive into that.
I think Cale's the only one who's read it, right?
That could be. Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't
I-
ask
I-
me questions about it because I read it maybe as it was coming out or just after it came out.
Might as well be new for you.
dang.
Yeah, because I read
Yeah.
Conquest. I read Conquest. That's where I started. I've never read
This-
Annihilation.
This was right. I was in high school. I read it under the jeans display at Hollister when I worked there.
Tucked away.
I think legit.
Annihilation Conquest. I guess we'll talk more about that, but I don't even know anything about that.
It's the follow-up. It's essentially what Brightest Day was to Annihilation's Blackest Night.
So it's not an event, it's a status quo? Is that
It might as well be an
Maybe-
event, but it's strange, right, Cale? How to
Maybe,
explain
maybe
that?
a status quo setter.
Yeah.
okay? I'll look into it because I don't remember it. I don't remember that. So yeah, we're gonna be reading Annihilation to discuss it on Tuesday. Dan says, I hope you guys have started. It's a lot to take in over a few days. So I have started. I want to say again a huge shout out to Atomic Hound for providing me with a way to read them, a few of the hardcover copies of the event spread out across 3 hardcovers. And I will refrain from giving any initial thoughts, but I will say that anyone who has not started their read, whether it's your first time or a reread, here's your warning. Get it going.
Yeah.
Get
Trying.
it going.
I'm
Dense.
trying. I'm so tired. I work so hard.
You're in the future too, Cale, so I think you need to start reading sooner than the
I mean,
rest of
I'm
us.
trying. I got 10 pages in to the first issue, the first Drax issue, and I went, I gotta take a nap.
I gotta sit down. Yeah.
I wanted to ask quickly, Sean, can you post or even say the what is included in the Annihilation collections? Because I know Marvel Unlimited has a special list that has everything. And if I'm going by that, and it looks complete to me, but I just want to make sure that that's correct. And by all accounts, I did reference outside sources and everything, and the way the books line up seems to be the Marvel Unlimited checklist.
Okay, so that's a good question. And I think everyone needs to know that because, we're all going to be reading this together. So my copies include Drax the Destroyer. So the 4 issues of that.
Miniseries,
Annihilation Prologue. Annihilation Nova, the 4 issues of that. And then Silver Surfer, the 4 Silver Surfer issues. It includes the Super Skrull story.
Yeah.
Ronin. Ooh, Super Skrull. I'm excited for that.
As I recall, and this is just my faint memory of it, the Super Scroll bits were my favorite parts.
I can't
Oh,
ever
shit.
think of Super Scroll without thinking of a waiter coming up to me. Well, yeah, the Scroll.
And then book 3 includes Annihilation, which I didn't realize was a standalone title.
Yeah.
Holy shit, I'm hyped now.
Yep.
And then Annihilation Heralds of Galactus.
Yeah.
Woo!
Lot.
We will find a complete list and compare it to what Sean has, and then we can post that in the Discord
Yeah.
at at some point today, probably.
Certainly.
Comics Explained in the chat. Thank you for joining us, Comics Explained. Annihilation was amazing.
We gonna
We'll
find
see.
out.
Yeah, we'll see.
So, Comics Explained joining us again twice a week. You're gonna Rob, you're gonna make me think, you're gonna make us think you like us if you keep showing up
Oops.
like this. And then we're gonna have to do something together. You know what I'm saying? So if you would like to be a part of this, if you would like to come on board and hang out with us, we'd love to have you. But otherwise, thank you for being here. Appreciate you showing up. As you know, our chat is big fans of what you do. And so are we. He says Comic Book Herald has a great reading order. I'll look into it. Is there anything that I didn't say that we should read? Does anybody know?
In my head, it's just like, keep reading Conquest, keep reading Guardians. Like, it's just, there's no end in my head for like Annihilation. It's just like, no, just keep reading until Marvel stop putting them out.
All the books.
Yes. Okay. This is the list I consulted the first time. So, yeah.
Comics Explained says, I'm down for doing something. I will reach out to you. Thank you.
Let's go.
That would be incredible. So if we get Rob on the show, then we've hit all the gods. We would have hit all the gods because we've had Sal on. We had Sal. We had Omar just, what was that, last 2 weeks ago?
Yep.
And we've had BJ, and then we would have had Rob. Those are the gods. Those are the YouTube comics gods. Be beautiful. Thanos Redemption, Amin says. I don't know what that is. I'll have to look into that. I will have to look into that. But okay, so you guys know the date. Tuesday, 6 p.m. Eastern, Annihilation. Start your reads now. Well, not now. Listen to us. But then, after you're done with us, go start your reads.
Rereads, apparently, for a lot of people, because people want this. So,
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so now let's get into our top 5 Marvel Comics events. Tyler and I got through our 5 and 4 last week, so we'll be on 3. We're going to just do our 3s, but Marco and Cale, you guys have got to give us your, well, this isn't really fair to Marco. I don't know how.
I did some homework. I have read 6 events apparently. So I hit the cusp on that one.
Can I know what didn't make the cut, Marco, before you start?
No.
Okay.
No.
That's hilarious. Give the honorable mention when you get to your number 1.
Yeah, that was the plan. Yeah.
Oh,
cool.
Perfect.
Cool. Kick us off then, Marco.
Yeah, so my number 5 is Empire. The first event that I read reading with this show.
What got bumped? Jeez.
2020, and I remember having thoughts on that. I remember being confused. I'm like, yo, this is the stuff you guys like, bro? What's going on
God.
here?
Marco's top 5 list consists of, I had thoughts on that.
His top 5 list consists of an event that I don't even think he liked.
I did not.
So this is your 5.
That's my 5. That's right. But you know what?
Oh my God.
Everything else from there up. So we're on a good roll. Number 3, Infinity Gauntlet. No, the
Number 4, you mean?
Sorry, number 4. Number 4, Infinity Gauntlet. That feels like a classic event and one of the few that I've read of the era, and so I had a lot of fun absorbing that and that history of the Marvel Universe. Number 3, Judgment Day. A lot of fun with that because I was in the middle of reading Eternals, and so that I felt like really led me into the event on a high note. But the event itself and the way that it plays out, it didn't end with me being so excited, and I felt like affected by enjoyment of Eternals, which I was really having a lot of fun with at that time. Those are my 3.
Very nice. Very nice. Baby's first 5 Marvel events. That's
right.
so fucking cute. Cale, you're up, buddy.
All right. I wonder if mine will be pretty similar to Sean and Tyler's. Uh, my number 5 is going to be the Secret War of 2004. So this was the Brian Michael Bendis and Gabriel Delato
Yep.
um miniseries that really kicked off a lot of espionage and a lot of broader distrust in the Marvel universe that led to a lot of the paranoia that was built on around Civil War and Secret Invasion, and then exploded with Norman Osborn taking over Shield. And it's probably a big reason why the original Nick Fury isn't around anymore.
Yep.
But I think the concept was so interesting and so like believable at the time because everything happened in the margins, and Nick Fury plays everything so close to the chest that he goes as far as sort of, I think if I remember right, he wiped the hero's memories and it only awakened when they talked about it or something. So it was also a sort of answer to Identity Crisis, but in a different angle. And it was the mental violation of these heroes, of characters like Spider-Man, big characters. And they went and did like a like a SEAL Team 6 and went after, I don't exactly remember who they went after, but they went on this dirty secret mission, that didn't leave them feeling good.
That's where Quake is first introduced, right? Am I right about that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Love
Yeah.
Quake.
Yo, I love Secret War. Oh my God, dude. I haven't read Secret War in like a decade.
And that stuff leads into like Secret Warriors too. Like that whole play area they were playing with, the shield stuff. Man, that's good shit.
Yeah. That's the lead in. Oh man, that's so good.
Yeah, another and we talk a lot here, and I'm about to talk even more about how much we like Bendis, but that Bendis era and what he built was built on paranoia and distrust, was just awesome. And so that said, my number 4 was Secret Invasion. And when I looked at a list of what I had, I was actually kind of surprised at Secret Invasion being so low. I thought that Civil War created such division in the Marvel universe that Secret Invasion was able to capitalize on. It didn't only create paranoia and distrust within the characters, it made me second guess my relationships to characters that I'd known and loved for decades. Go with characters, like Spider-Man and Captain America, and even at the time, Iron Man, who just went, completely against his whole community. So I love Secret Invasion and the way it builds and then kicks off Siege and Fear Itself and a host of things that come after it.
I love, oh my God, dude. Like we could do a whole show just talking about these events because everything you're saying is like getting me so hyped. Like I need to read these again. Like I'm happy Annihilation won because I'm getting to experience a new thing, but damn it if I don't want to read Secret Invasion again, man.
Bro,
I wonder if we should do almost a Bendis retrospective at some point where maybe we read certain stuff and then, we couldn't possibly ask the audience to tackle all of this, but we do it and we talk about all of it for this era.
Before we do that,
of
though,
nuts.
Marco's got to read all of it.
I gotta read everything.
Yeah.
We would all have to read it again.
It's been a long
Steel
time
Trap.
since I've read all of it.
Steel Trap. I mean, I think about Dark Reign. I think about Dark Avengers. Man, I'm bricked up already. Like, that stuff's my jam.
Oh yeah. That's good stuff. That is the good stuff. That is
Yeah.
the good stuff. Someone mentioned that Secret War is not an event. Look, we've done the whole song and dance about what is and is an event. As far as I'm concerned, if it is a series unto itself with big implications, that's event for me. That's event for me. Call it a crossover, call it an event, call it whatever you want. It's Cale's list, and Secret War belongs there. So Tyler, do you have your number 3?
I do. It's Secret Invasion. Secret Invasion. I mean, we just talked about it, but it's my jam. It's I always think about that's kind of right when I started reading comics around then. Oh, we got a little special guest here.
We have a special guest joining us. You guys heard it unfolding. We are being joined by Comics Explained. So, Tyler, do you have your number 3? Oh, we can hear
Secret
your
Invasion.
audio of listening to us.
Secret Invasion.
Rob.
I talked about it, but it's my jam. It's I always think.
Source.
Yeah.
I guess I'll just finish off Secret Invasion while I'm talking about
Go
it.
for it.
The thing that always gets me is the marketing around it. The ability to have.
Yeah.
Do you remember there was the scroll covers, like the hidden scroll covers, where it's like, oh, why does this cover look a little weird? I remember specifically it was Jason Aaron's Ghost Rider run, which if y'all haven't read that, that's good stuff. That Ghost Rider, real good. But I got one where the flames were green on the cover. I'm like, all right, fine, whatever. It wasn't a variant. I mean, I guess it was, but it wasn't marketed as a variant. Like, it was the same cover as the A cover, just that difference. And I picked it up not even knowing what it was. And apparently it was like a secret variant where it would have all of that on it. And like that just suckered me. And the Who Do You Trust, the tie-ins, what was going on with like, yes, the main story is good, and it's a little hard to divest the main story from stuff like Initiative, which was and will always be my jam. Just the stuff explaining that is real good.
Rob, you with us? If you're speaking, we can't hear you right now.
Okay, what about now?
There we go.
Oh,
there it is. There's
Yeah,
the voice.
I have my mic input in the wrong one. I never use Zoom, so like I have no idea how to make this work. Yeah, I love you guys. I've been watching your all's channel for like a while.
Oh wow!
Whoa.
Thank you so much. That is
you
an
guys are
honor to
amazing.
hear.
Yeah, you guys are awesome.
We asked for the lurkers to come out, and man, they did.
Oh, it's all good. It's all good. Yeah.
How are you doing, man?
I'm doing good. Yeah, I'm doing good. Like I was just chilling here this morning and I was like, I wonder who's like live streaming today. Because like I do that. Like I'll jump on YouTube and just like look at what YouTube channels are live streaming for comics. And just like check out different comic channels. And I saw you guys were on and I was like, oh, the comic pals are up. Like, yes, let's go check this out. Yeah. So I was just like jump in the chat and start talking to you guys. But yeah, that's a good call with Secret Invasion, by the way. Secret Invasion was really, really good.
Mm-hmm. Rob, were you actively reading comics during that era of Marvel and DC?
Dude, I've been reading comics since the 90s, man.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. I started with X-Men Volume 1 way back in the day. So yeah.
I love
Yeah,
it.
Secret Invasion was really, really cool. And it was a good point that you made about like Nick Fury, because like that's exactly like the coolest thing is like if you read the tie-ins, Nick Fury figures it out before everybody else does.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's a good point.
So I would love to be able to do this in a more formal situation where we have you on.
Why do you want to be more formal, man? Like people love off the cuff stuff, man. Like people are just like, just make it informal and just be like have a little randomness to it.
Oh, trust me, nothing excites me more than something I didn't expect. And this is the greatest kind of surprise. But we've got to do this again where we can put you on the thumbnail and really draw people to the table. But I would love if you could share with us, share with our listeners, share with us your top 5 Marvel events, because I'm very interested in hearing your reasoning.
Oh, I will. But like, this is your all's podcast, man. I want to hear what you guys have to say, and then I'll jump into my top 5. But yeah, like, I want to hear the rest of your all's top 5.
Okay, so we're doing this over the course of a few weeks. So we're gonna stop at our threes, and then I'll do my 3 since the other guys went, and then you can go with your 5.
Okay. Yeah. Sure.
All right. So my number 3 is Secret Empire. Now, Secret Empire is genuinely one of my favorite comic stories. And I know that there are a lot of people who shit on Secret Empire and don't like it. And I remember the book burnings when Captain America was revealed as Hydra. I get all that. But that story that Nick Spencer was telling, going all the way back to the Pleasantville stuff, the Pleasant Hill arc where all the villains were kidnapped and taken to that place where they thought that they were living in like a perfect town, but it was really, they were really prisoners. I thought all that was brilliant. And the conflict between the two Captain Americas, Steve and Sam, and the way that they were able to be shown as meaningfully different heroes with different perspectives and different ways of being Captain America, I thought all that was fantastic. And of course, the biggest piece being what I thought was a stroke of genius to take the hero of Earth, Captain America, the hero of the United States, and make him their biggest threat. And not do it in a way where it's like, oh, Cap's been bad the whole time. It's not that, but make the world think that Captain America has actually been this way the whole time. Make them believe that what he is saying is right, put the message behind that man, and take it all the way. I thought that was brilliant. I loved it. I thought it was a great way to elevate Sam Wilson's Captain America by making him the standard bearer opposition to the Hydra Cap. And I thought it really did a great job of elevating some of the characters that were introduced to us and elevated during the all new, all different era. Stellar story. I loved every second of it. And I miss those days of Nick Spencer's time as the head of Marvel. I thought Secret Empire was amazing. That's my number 3.
Also, the marketing around that had to be specific to not play the cards that, yes, it's all going to be, he'll be Cap eventually, you know, like it's not going to be that. But they had to lean into it. They had to kayfabe that to make it look like it was a legit story, which led to a lot of that pushback.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, you remember like they had the tweets and it was like Captain America's like Hail Hydra. And like even Chris Evans responded to the tweet. He's like, say it ain't so. And it's just like, yeah, man, Captain America's a Hydra agent. It was amazing.
I felt like that was the last time that Marvel was really willing to push the envelope and, do something that would ruffle feathers. It feels like they're, they try to keep things pretty even keeled, but I appreciate the version of Marvel that pushes the envelope, makes you think critically about the stories that are being told, and lets some risky, dangerous stuff get through those pages.
Yeah.
So what about you, Rob? What's your top 5?
Funny enough, Secret Empire is it's also my number 3. But yeah, my number 5 favorite story, crossover event is probably Thanos Imperative. And it gets weird when you get into like the Dan Abnett era of Cosmic Marvel, because you guys are just getting into like the whole Cosmic Marvel landscape, right? Because like Annihilation is technically where it starts, where like Dan Abnett starts. So like Rocket Raccoon comes back after being an old, I think like Steve Englehart creation, maybe. I can't remember who it was that made him way back in the day, but like Star-Lord comes back after being like a one-off character that looks almost nothing like he does in Dan Abnett's run. But then like Dan Abnett starts with Annihilation. I would skip Annihilation Conquest. It's okay, and if you do read it, I think it's the Phyla-Vell that's like the prelude to it, and then just go to the main event and ignore all the other tie-ins. But Thanos Imperative, because of like how Dan Abnett was doing things, every story arc was basically a crossover event. Right. And Thanos Imperative was so dope because there's this amazing moment where Rocket Raccoon confronts Thanos after they had resurrected him from when Drax killed him. And Thanos is on like this mindless rage or something like that. And Rocket Raccoon's just like, so we got a choice here, bro. Like either you can calm down or I can drop you into a black hole and you'll just have infinite life forever. Like you'll just live for all eternity because a black hole's not going to kill you and you'll just be alive. There'll be no way to get you out. And so eventually, like he calms down. But for the main Thanos imperative story itself, the coolest thing about it is it introduced like because you guys never read Thanos imperative, do you? Did you?
I actually did.
I
You
have,
did.
yeah.
Okay.
Think
Okay,
I
yeah.
read
So you
it,
guys
yeah.
all read it. Okay. So for those of you guys out there in the chat who never read it, like Thanos Imperative was dope because it introduced the idea of the Cancerverse, right? So
Yes.
yeah, it's like the idea where at some point, Marvel of the Kree he was supposed to die from cancer, like he did in the old 1984 story, right? Like the death of Captain Marvel from Jim Starlin, I think he wrote it. And in that alternate reality, he didn't. Instead, like him alongside all the other superheroes basically banded together and killed Mistress Death. But what it did is it laid the groundwork for like Shumagorath and the many angled ones to like enter into the universe through Doctor Strange. And so they basically possess everybody and like no one can die. And so, Thanos Imperative, of course, builds off of like War of Kings, Realm of Kings, right? The great big huge war out in space that opened like a tear, right? The fault, as they called it. And there's this amazing moment in the story where the forces of Marvel from that alternate reality are invading, and you get the Galactus engine, which is just this giant head of Galactus that comes pouring through the rift. And it was crazy. They had like killed Galactus and weaponized him. Um, but yeah, that one was cool because it's like ultimately Thanos brings Mistress Death to like the Cancerverse, and then Mistress Death touches Marvel, kills everybody who's supposed to die, and it gets clean slated. Then Marvel ignores it; they undo it with Annihilation Scourge, and they're like, "Yep, it's still there," and never did anything with it of any real meaning. But yeah, that one was phenomenal. Number 4 is absolutely Annihilation, and the only reason why I would pick Annihilation as number 4 is because it's the first time that Marvel actually consolidates their cosmic landscape. That up until that point, it was like some Jim Starlin stories here and like some stories over there. And it's like, it very much felt like DC's cosmic landscape, where it's like, yeah, there's like aliens and people and stuff out there. But like, unless it's the Shi'ar in a Chris Claremont comic, an X-Men comic or something like that, yeah, they're just kind of doing their own thing. And Dan Abnett's like, let's bring them all together in like this giant battle, right? Where like a nihilist tries to wipe everything out. And it's cool because unlike a lot of Marvel stories at the time, where Annihilation is like, the build up and all that kind of stuff. If you jump into the main event, which I think is like the best way to do it, it just opens up with like Nova and Star Lord fleeing for their lives, leading like a refugee group, like off of a world because Annihilus has just conquered most of the universe. And then when you read Annihilation and you take a step back, right, and you look at like, my number 2, or I'm sorry, my number 1 story, right? You look at like Civil War, then you realize that like while the universe is being laid waste to by this just ultimate nihilist, superheroes are squabbling on Earth,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Over nonsense. And it's just like, dude, Annihilation was because it set in motion the whole cosmic landscape for Marvel under Dan Abnett, which was just an incredible, it was just incredible series of stories. But yeah, number 3, absolutely Secret Empire. I love Secret Empire. Like Secret Empire was phenomenal. I mean, dude, you nailed it. Like in an evil version of Captain America, it was so cool. And what was so funny was that looking at that story when it came out, is that you had so many people who didn't know anything about it and were making judgment calls on it, where they're just like, oh my God, Marvel's doing this, garbage stuff, and it's like he's always been a Hydra. And it's like, no, like in like Avengers Standoff, right? And like Assault on Pleasant Hill and all that kind of stuff. Like the Red Skull takes a cosmic cube and rewrites Captain America's history. Like that's how you get into it. The problem was the marketing for that, like the prelude to it. Like the main event Marvel marketed, but they didn't really market how you got to that point. So unless you were reading those stories from all new, all different Avengers, you had no idea how in the world you got into that. But to your point about an evil Captain America, right? If ever there were a superhero that, if they turned evil, could completely and totally dismantle the entire superhero landscape on Earth, it's Captain America because it's the last person anybody would ever expect. Like nobody ever expects a villainous Steve Rogers. Nobody ever expects him to actually be a Hydra agent in secret. And like between his battle strategy and all that stuff, and the idea that he's like, okay, so like basically we're going to steal a Chitauri queen, we're going to put it on Earth, and then we're going to create a giant like force field around the planet and then send our heaviest hitters out into space to like stop this constant invasion. Well, there go those guys, right? Captain Marvel and Hyperion and all those guys, like people who could end the conflict like that, they're out there and there's no conceivable way back. And then we're just gonna like turn the world against the Avengers. And we're like, because the worthiness enchantment doesn't say like whosoever holds this hammer, if he be a good guy, shall possess the power of Thor, right? Like he picks the hammer up because he believes in the righteousness of his cause and like lays waste to the superheroes. And it's so cool. It was such a phenomenal story. The problem is that it ended so poorly, right? Because like I agree with you guys on this. Like Marvel gave in to the backlash. And you're 100% right when you say like it was the last time Marvel was willing to push the envelope. Because by the time you get to the end of the story, Marvel's like, okay, we got to like wrap this up, right? Oh, I think they're mowing grass out there. But Marvel's like, we got to wrap this up, man. Like, we got to do something about this. So, like, in a tie-in, a cosmic cube gets coughed up, which just fixes everything, you know. And it's just like, bro, you know, and yeah, it was crazy. But yeah, number two, oh my god, I had it in my head as number two, and I can't remember what it is now. Oh my god, maybe it was the Onslaught saga. I was sitting here thinking about it as I was talking about it. But you know,
Civil War 2, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. The character assassination of Captain of Carol Danvers. Yeah.
Thank you.
The
Thank
unnecessary death of Tony Stark. Yeah. Dude, the backlash to Civil War 2. I gotta be honest, man. I don't think I've seen backlash to a comic book story like that in years.
Yeah.
In years. Like folks despise that story. And rightfully so, because it was just like this half-assed cash grab from Marvel because Captain America 3 was coming out. Right. And they're like, let's just write a story. We're like, you know, the superheroes fight again, and we'll just call it Civil War 2, you know, and right, it was just insanely poorly done. Yeah, no, Civil War 2 was awful. Yeah, God, if I had to pick a crossover for my number two, second only to Civil War. Ooh.
Did you call out Secret Invasion? Yes, you did, right?
Yeah, I talked about Secret Invasion earlier, but I'm trying to figure out what number two would be for me. Maybe Onslaught Saga, right? Because Onslaught was really really fun, but it also just kind of screamed 1990s. And one of the things that I've always loved in the world of comics is just ridiculously overpowered characters. Like I've always just been fascinated by that, like characters at borderline godhood. And Onslaught in and of himself wasn't necessarily a godly like character. It wasn't until he absorbed Franklin Richards and then absorbed Nate Gray that he just becomes this, you know, has this crazy level of power. You know, and then ultimately, you know, the superheroes, everybody, like basically all the unpopular ones that weren't selling, everybody but the X-Men and Spider-Man, right, sacrifice their lives, and then you get heroes reborn from Franklin Richards and whatnot. But one, you know, I will say one crossover that I think I really enjoyed that not a lot of people talk about anymore was Original Sin.
We do on this show.
Yeah, we talked about that last week.
Okay. Yeah. Like Original Sin. Original Sin was great, and I don't know if it was necessarily the event itself that was so phenomenal. I think it was what came out of it that made the crossover so cool, right? Because so many things spun out of that. Everything from like, you know, small, really fun stories where like Lockjaw finds the bone that he thought he lost, to like huge moments where like Captain America remembers he was part of the Illuminati and got, you know, his mind wiped by Steve Rogers and yeah, and it's like all these just huge things that came out of the story. What is it? That's how they introduced Angela, right, from the old Spawn myth. They brought her over to Marvel. Yeah, there were just so many cool things that came out of it. I don't know if I fully agree because you guys remember. So you guys remember when Original Sin launched, Nick Fury whispers something to Thor, and Thor just isn't able to lift his hammer, right? You guys remember when they came out years later and they were like, when Nick Fury was like, well, what he said to Thor was that Gore was right. And it was the most lackluster thing ever.
Horrible. Horrible.
It gave us Mighty Thor, which is fantastic, and introduced me to Russell Dodderman. Great. But that was very much like, oh God, that's what he said.
It's one of those things where like the mystery is way cooler than the solution ever could be.
Yeah. And they let it go on too long. Like they just let it last too long before they answered it. And I firmly believe they ended up doing that, one, because they thought maybe there was still some traction there. Maybe it was necessary for Jason Aaron's work on Thor. But it was definitely just kind of hand wavily thrown in there. Like, Gore was right. Okay, cool. Moving on. And
Right.
like that's all you get. But yeah, so Original Sin was cool. The idea of one of the things that I thought was so cool that came out of it was the fact that we had never actually seen the real Nick Fury, right? Outside of like the
Yeah.
old school Nick Fury, Agent of Shield comics, he actually has not been in Marvel for years, and you end up realizing it's all just been life model decoys this whole time. And
Yeah.
it's just kind of like, wow, like that was really mind blowing when that happened. Um, the death of the Watcher and so on. But yeah, nobody ever really talks about Original Sin, and I guess there's not really a whole lot of longevity outside of the immediate aftermath to it.
It was fun.
Number one is absolutely Civil War. Civil War will always be my number one crossover in Marvel, like forever. Yeah, hands down.
Listen, I love Civil War to death. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Civil War. So if you want to expand on that, please feel free. But also, I was thinking, was your number two Secret Wars 2015 by chance?
Oh, that was my number two. No, it wasn't Secret. Well, it wasn't just Secret Wars. It was Hickman's event. Oh my God, Hickman's Avengers
Let's
and New
go.
Avengers. Son.
Number two
Man,
is
dude,
just Jonathan Hickman.
yeah. It's Jonathan Hickman as a writer. That's my
Yeah.
number two
Yeah.
crossover event. It's just a human being who writes comics. Yeah, no, dude. Oh my God, Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers going into Secret Wars because it's all just one giant cohesive story. And that's the funny thing is technically it is an Avengers comic, right? But with the exception of New Avengers Volume One. Well, okay, so here's a funny thing. I don't know how many of you guys do this, but like when I went through, like reading it as it went along, it was an absolute nightmare to try to follow at the time. Right? Were you guys following Hickman's Avengers and
Yeah.
New Avengers?
Yeah,
at the time
oh
was-
yeah.
yeah.
Weren't
Sure
some
enough.
issues delayed over other ones? So like it messed up
Yeah.
time and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It did, yeah. It totally screwed up the reading order and all that kind of stuff. And so once the whole thing was done, I actually went back and I found on I want to say either Comic Book Herald, um, one of those, maybe it was How to Love Comics. They had an actual like issue by issue reading order, and I was like, okay, like this is dope, and just like read through the whole thing. And once you take it issue by issue, it does get a little wonky because it's like New Avengers issues 1 through 3, and then Avengers 1 through like 6, and then New Avengers 7, and then like Avengers like 7 through 12. And so you kind of go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. But with the exception of the main Avengers comic, the first story arc, and New Avengers 1 through 3, it becomes a crossover event like that. Like, I mean, it's just everybody starts appearing like all over the place. And so, yeah, I would, even though it's titled Avengers and New Avengers, I would 100% consider it like from almost beginning to end a crossover event. But to this day, as much as I still say Civil War is better, like story wise, narrative wise, and consequence wise. Um, but to this day, I have never read a crossover event that was that expansive, that complex, and kept me glued as much as Avengers and New Avengers did. But you guys having read it when it came out, I read it as it came out. I'm sure fans in the chat read it as it came out. It was exhausting, man. Like
Yeah.
it was like a 3 or 4 year long comic epic, right? And it just took forever to get to the conclusion of it all.
It was
I-
heavy too. Like it wasn't lighthearted. Like Black Panther's debating on whether or not to wipe out full worlds.
Yeah.
I was enthralled by that. I really loved having to sort of sit with everything that the Illuminati was considering
Mhm.
every month. Like, oh shit, wow, Doctor Strange just took in all this demonic energy. What's gonna happen? I'll find out in a month or two from now. And
Yeah.
I would always have to go back and read the last issue because of exactly what you're saying. But I was just so enraptured by the story that Hickman was telling and the elements that were at play. I thought it was all brilliant. I love that we got the Infinity event smack dab in the middle of that whole thing. He
Yeah.
touched on so much. It's like the guy took all his thoughts on Marvel, except X-Men thoughts, and just vomited them out. And they're the greatest thoughts I've ever seen. I ate them up. I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah, yeah, it was incredible. Um, yeah, Black Panther, and that's a funny thing too, because when you look at Avengers and New Avengers, right, and like even now when I think about it, and I think back to when that comic was coming out at the time, it brings back these amazing feelings because you're like, okay, cool. So we have a month before like Avengers comes out. We'll read some Black Widow or some Punisher or some Captain America or something like that. You're reading these comics and you're like, oh, that's right. The incursions are still happening out there. Nobody remembers, like nobody knows, right? Outside of the Illuminati, like no one knows. And so it adds this really interesting layer of complexity to Marvel because you have all these traditional superheroes like Spider-Man and so on who are running around and doing their own thing. And then you get like Spider-Verse. And at the end of Spider-Verse, when it's all said and done and the good guys win, the inheritors are defeated, and stuck on that radiated world or whatever it is, then it's like, okay, Spider-Man UK, let's send you home. And like his whole world and universe is gone. Right. Like because I don't know if you guys remember, like in Spider-Verse, they go to send him back, they open a portal, and it's just blackness.
Yeah.
There's nothing there.
Universal Brexit.
Oh my God. Yeah. It's like, holy cow, like the universal Brexit. Like the incursions caused Brexit in Spider-Man UK's universe. Yeah, it's like his whole universe was destroyed by an incursion. Like, oh my God. And so it's these just really, really cool small things. But yeah, in terms of like actual storytelling, narrative, and stakes, Civil War is where it's at. Like to me, Civil War will always be my number one story. And the reason why is because as cool as Avengers and New Avengers was, I was incredibly skeptical when they got to Secret Wars that Marvel was going to actually reboot. Like there's no way they actually I hope they do. The story is designed for them to, but I don't know if they actually will. And in the aftermath of Secret Wars, it's like all new, all different Marvel, which isn't really new or different at all, right? It's like, all the same, right? And not new Marvel, and it's just like, okay, so there were no stakes here. This was just a giant event, right? And that was it, right? Nothing that happened in the story actually mattered at all, except that I guess maybe they just brought Miles Morales over because the Ultimate Universe isn't there anymore, but you could have done that in 6 issues, right? Bendis could have just written Spider-Man 2, right? And the way that story ended could have just been like, actually, Miles, come hang out here. And Miles is like, cool, because over there is cooler than over here. And like, that's it, right? So, I mean, didn't really have any stakes at the end of Secret Wars. But with Civil War, I mean, it changed everything. The way that Marvel handled their characters and the things that came after, right? Because Tony Stark becomes director of S.H.I.E.L.D. That leads into things like Secret Invasion, right? It leads into House of M, kind of indirectly, but like coming out of House of M and all the chaos that ensued with mutants losing their powers. You go into Secret Invasion, right? Like Deadpool basically sends information off, Norman Osborn intercepts it, and then it's just like, the government's like, how could you have possibly missed this, Tony Stark, right? So he gets ousted, Norman Osborn becomes director of S.H.I.E.L.D., then you get Hammer and you get Dark Reign. And it's really cool with like all the things that transpired following Civil War. But the main event itself, from a philosophical standpoint, right? Like neither side was any more right or wrong than the other, right? And it kind of just made you question and ask like legitimate questions in all of this, right? Like, Tony Stark is like, we have to regulate. There's this really, really cool moment. I don't remember exactly who it was that he was talking to. I want to say he was talking to Steve Rogers, or maybe he was talking to Spider-Man and trying to convince Spider-Man to come over to his side. But there's this really, really cool moment where Tony Stark is talking about why he sides with regulation in Civil War. And he's like, I'm a futurist. I look to the future, right? I don't really care about the present day. And he's like, the problem with this is that if we don't regulate superheroes, something worse will happen, right? Like the government will just outlaw superheroes entirely, right? Or they turn on us. And in effect, he's referencing things like Days of Future Past. And if you've read stories like that, then you kind of tie that into Civil War as an indirect, inference. And it's just like, damn, this is really cool, right? This is really, really, really cool. But just the gravitas and the significance of it all. Superheroes going to war against each other with ideologies, and Captain America doing things that he wouldn't normally do. And the fact that top to bottom, everybody was involved in some capacity, right? That Tony Stark goes to like Heroes for Hire, Colleen Wing, and all those guys, and it's just like, go find Iron Man or go find Captain America. That's what you need to do, right? And it gives them like purpose, it gives them significance, stakes, right? The Thunderbolts make a return under Baron Zemo, and it's just like, dude, this is phenomenal. And then following that, you go into like Mighty Avengers under Carol Danvers with the first volume and all that kind of cool stuff. And yeah, like Civil War was just, I still say that was the best crossover event that Marvel's ever done in the history of their company. Like, it was phenomenal. Give me 1 second, guys. I gotta close my window.
Yeah, no worries.
But that's also the event that like they've chased since. You know, like Crisis on Infinite Earths is what I think of like DC. DC's always had Crisis since, and they've always kind of been chasing that whale in a way.
Yeah.
Civil War is the one for Marvel. They've always been trying to chase that in some way, even with Civil War 2. Yikes.
Hype, hype wise, yes, but I think we're only just at a point now where we're just coming out of seeing like ramifications and story implications from the original Civil War. Like we're just at a point where like stories aren't totally referencing it, you know, every 5 issues or whatever.
No, you're not wrong. You're not wrong, right? Because like even in Hickman's Avengers, the New Avengers, right? By the time you get to the very end, where you have Iron Man and Tony Stark fighting each other, right? And like, I'm sorry, Captain America and Iron Man fighting each other. And Steve Rogers is all aged up, you know, after the nail storyline, he loses the super soldier serum. There's this amazing moment where like he shows up at where Stark's at in a war machine suit. And Stark thinks it's James Rhodes. And when Captain America appears, he's like, it's time to settle up, Tony. And it's just like, cool. So this has like been everything since Civil War, right? Like just the rivalry between the two. And in a lot of ways, it almost, not quite, but it almost matches the rivalry between like Reed Richards and Doctor Doom, right? And so it's like, and the crazy thing, like as by the time you get to the end of the story, it references back to the very beginning of Avengers from Hickman, right? Where he's like, you know, there was light and there was dark, and one was good and one was evil. And basically, it's like they cancel each other out, right? Like ultimately, neither side wins, right? Evil dies, good dies, because like a helicarrier crashes into the two of them and kills them both while they're fighting each other. But like, but no, I mean, yeah, 100% story implications, right? It just goes on and on and on and on and on. And even now, there's still, you know, a little bit of rivalry between the two just from the events of Civil War. Right. Yeah. So no, you absolutely nailed it. And yeah, we're just getting to that point.
And even now, the writers who are writing comics now were reading Civil War when it came out. Like that's the stuff they came up with in a way.
Yeah.
So there's going to be some DNA there for sure.
Yeah, 100%.
One of the things that I always think about with Civil War, and that I feel a lot of people get wrong, and I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on this, Rob, is people always say that the characters are out of character throughout that story. And I've always viewed it as they're in an extreme circumstance. And, you know, obviously, like fighting Galactus is an extreme circumstance, but this is a scenario at which their lives are at risk. The way of life is at risk. And their ability to do what they do with the freedom with which they do it is at risk. And so everybody is escalating based on the other's actions. And so they both start at a pretty flat place, both sides. But as, you know, Tony does one thing that seems a little extreme based on what's happening around him, based on being spat on by the mother of that kid, based on feeling guilty for the events of Civil War. Or rather, the events of the explosion. You know, based on those things, he ratchets things up. Then Captain America does too, because he feels he has people to protect, and he has a righteous justification for his actions. And so they keep one-upping each other, but I never felt that that was them being out of character. I felt like they were acting based on their circumstances. Would you agree with that?
I would. I would. It's Cale, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
well,
okay.
I know you're Sean, but I'm talking about
Cale, yeah, that's me.
Yeah. So to Cale's point, I wanted to make sure because I was always kind of like unsure if it was like Cale, Cole, or something like that. But yeah. So I mean, to Cale's point, right? Like story implications, right? So let's talk about. I mean, let's kind of go back to like Avengers and New Avengers for a second. I love that story. I'm always going to reference it as often as I can, right? If you read Civil War in a microcosm, 100% the characters act they're out of character, right? It doesn't really make any sense why they're doing what they're doing. But then you get to the very end of Avengers and New Avengers, Captain America, Tony Stark fighting each other, and you learn that Tony Stark knew the whole time that there was no way to stop the incursions. And like there's this point where Steve Rogers is like, you had us all running in circles, and Stark is like, of course I did. Right? Like if I had told you guys there was no way to save the multiverse. There's you guys, it would have all just descended into madness, right? I told you, Captain America, about the idea of building a better world, making Avengers world to give you busy work, to keep you distracted. Reed Richards runs on hope. right? Like I'm the only one that could actually see what was coming down the line. And when you take that kind of character development and then you apply it to Civil War, makes perfect sense that Tony Stark would do what he was doing. Now, it sucks that it took like a decade, right? 9 years to kind of get to that point. But the fact is that it makes perfect sense that Tony Stark would sit down and say, okay, so yes, this woman Miriam comes to me and tells me about how her child was killed, and I'm doing all this because of her. And sure, like looking at that in and of itself, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But then when you take a step back, you take that character development from Avengers and New Avengers, and you apply it to Tony Stark in Civil War. Then in turn, he's just kind of like, okay, so this became really big, really fast, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. Right? This woman out there leading the charge against, with like regulating superheroes, doing something about superheroes, this cannot be done. It cannot be undone. It cannot be stopped. Public sentiment is way too strong. And politicians care more about power than they do anything else. And they'll do whatever it takes to keep it, which means if the general public is in favor of regulating superheroes, the government will regulate superheroes. And if we don't do anything, right, if we fight against it tooth and nail, the government will just wipe us all out, right? Like, look at how they treat the X-Men, And so, again, looking at the characters on the surface level, 100%, right? But tying into Cale's idea about the idea of like plot threads kind of building after the events of Civil War, when you look at all the character development, specifically for Tony Stark that came after, because, the Iron Man movie and how popular he was and how much work was being done in his character, it kind of requires you to almost read between the lines, and say, like, if I'm Tony Stark and I'm a futurist and I'm always 20 steps ahead of everybody, how would I see this kind of circumstance? Well, of course, we have to go for regulation, right? Like, the alternative is that we basically face being outlawed and becoming fugitives of the law, and then Days of Future Past, right? So, in terms of like Spider-Man, revealing his identity to the world, that is a little wonky, but again, within the context of the story, it kind of makes sense because it was a way for Tony Stark to essentially manipulate Spider-Man,
Yeah.
and then to like get him onto his side. But that's why the tie-ins become important, because over the course of the tie-ins, Spider-Man's just kind of like, I mean, I understand where Tony's coming from, but I don't know if I agree with it. But for the most part, he kind of sides with it until somebody shoots Aunt May. And now he's got something to lose. Now he's got personal stakes, right? And like the thing he feared the most, that folks would go after the people he loved after learning who he is, comes to fruition, right? It brings back the whole Gwen Stacy dying at the hands of maybe himself or Green Goblin situation. And so it's just kind of like, nope, walking away, right? And that's it, right? And then, of course, everything gets fixed from, one more day, brand new day, one moment in time, and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, I don't, Captain America, it makes perfect sense, right? That just with this kind of dogmatic approach to like freedom above everything else and disregarding any and all other possible scenarios, that he would 100% stand against the idea of government regulation of superheroes, right? Because this whole stance was like, this is one step away from government regulating people. There can be no room made, no quarter given to the idea of encroachment on people's civil liberties, because if you give you give the mouse some milk, it's going to want a cookie, right? It's always going to want more. It's always going to want more. And so from from a philosophical standpoint, especially considering Captain America kind of living through World War II and everything that came out of it, it makes perfect sense that he would see where it came from. So no, I don't know if I would say the characters were acting out of character. They kind of acted exactly the way that you would expect, given the development that they had either up to that point in time or kind of retroactively applying future development to that story. So, yeah, no, it makes sense to me that they were doing what they were doing. Well, I mean, what do you guys think? What do you guys think? Do you guys think that they were all acting out of character in Civil War? You're just kind of like, yeah.
I agree with you.
I do too. And I want to take it one step further with Iron Man specifically. I wonder if this is one of the first times that a major philosophical stance happens with Iron Man. Because you have not too long before Civil War was Extremis, where Tony's armor is hijacked and basically enacts a terrorist plot. And then, all this stuff, everything happens with Civil War. And then, like you were saying, Rob, he sees the incursions happening in Hickman's run. I wonder if this is the moment when Tony Stark becomes a futurist, you know, when this is a man who looks at everything and then starts to try to look past it to see what's coming and to prepare for it in that way that everybody says as long as Batman has a plan, he can, he can beat it.
Yeah,
Tony Stark wants to be that.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
I also think it's worth pointing out that when we're talking about Tony Stark, the Amazing Spider-Man tie-ins that came before Civil War started also add a lot that many people haven't read about Tony's motivations going into the Civil War. He explains it perfectly clearly when they go to Washington to have a conversation about the Superhero Registration Act
Mhm.
before the general public knows it exists. And he makes the argument there that, hey, we don't need to do this. We've been allies to you guys for a long time, and we've kept America safe, and blah 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 blah. But he knows that the wave of registration is coming no matter what he says and does. So he fabricates a scenario in those issues where he has the Crimson Dynamo come and attack Washington, and then
Yeah.
he and Spider-Man stop it to show Washington why superheroes are necessary. He's trying everything he can to stop this from happening before it happens, but he can't, and so he just dives in and tries to make sure that someone he trusts, i.e., himself, is at the head of this thing. And I think that when you understand Tony's character, that makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's one of the reasons why I love Civil War so much, because it was also like the small moments, right? Like there's a point like Spider-Man doesn't deal with lawyers or anything like that, and Tony Stark deals with them on a regular basis. So there's this really amazing moment, like when they're sitting in front of a judge, right, or political committee of some kind, whatever it is, but like they're sitting there, and Spider-Man's being asked these questions, and he's answering them in a way where it's obvious he's not familiar with like legal proceedings and whatnot. So there's a point where Tony pulls him aside after they're said and done, and he was like, "Okay, so here's the thing: you need to learn to talk like a lawyer." And Spider-Man's like, I mean, I don't know what that means. And he's like, if I ask you what time it is, what's the answer you, or if I ask you, do you know what time it is? What's your response? And he was like, well, it's such and such time. He's like, no, the response you give is, yes, I know what time it is. He's like, answer the question you were asked. And it's all those small little, moments that like go towards these little cool character developments and adjustments and changes and different things like that. And yeah, I mean, it's yeah, I don't really consider the characters acting. The only thing that I will say that I think in terms of Civil War that felt kind of forced was the whole story arc with damage control, and the whole idea of the extreme nature of Wolverine. I do love that like Wolverine was tasked with like tracking down Nitro, and I think it was really actually Wolverine's choice to try to find Nitro
Yep.
because of everything that had gone on. But like the extreme levels of his healing factor were ridiculous, right? Like where he gets blown up by Nitro, he gets incinerated down to his skeleton, and then he just like grows back like that. And it's just like, so that we're doing now, we're just indiscriminately applying like timetables.
I once I spoke with the editor of that book, John Barber, and he told me that that moment was one of the only regrets that he had about his time editing at Marvel, because that shit didn't make any sense
Yeah.
and they couldn't explain it, but it was now part of canon that Wolverine can regenerate from a bomb.
Yeah, instantaneously, no
Yeah.
less. Like,
Yeah.
within minutes, like it's like okay, because it's so because I remember reading that at the time, and I'm like, okay, this doesn't make any sense because like in Days of Future Past, this is how he was killed, incinerated down to the skeleton, but here he just returns instantly, and it's just like okay, like it just and I mean that's gonna happen, right? When you have like almost 50 years of separation between like a story, between like two separate stories and two separate events. I mean, it's unavoidable. But yeah, like the damage control thing. I mean, it made sense in given the context of Civil War, and the Civil War was as much a political story as it was a superhero story, but it just felt unnecessary. It's like so damage control is being ran by a crooked guy who's trying to secure government contracts, and it's just and he gave what is it, mutant growth hormone to Nitro, and that's how we're here. And it's like, okay, look, I mean, why couldn't it just be that Nitro was just a crazy asshole,
Yeah.
who just blew up Stamford, Connecticut, because the new Warriors were trying to make a reality TV show. I mean, why couldn't it just be that? But by no means is it a takeaway from the story. So there's certainly instances, I guess, where maybe characters or aspects of the story, but and I will say, if people were to say that like Reed Richards was acting out of character with Prison 42, and that Hank Pym was acting out of character with Prison 42, and like throwing superheroes in the negative zone. On one hand, I would say I can totally understand where they're coming from, right? Like Reed Richards, like the head of the first family of Marvel of superheroes, is indiscriminately throwing superheroes into a negative zone prison where they're basically enduring some of the worst possible, treatment that they could endure, right? Thrown in a cell, given bread and water. It's in like, what is it? Bill Foster's just dead in a cell right after having had a hole blown in him by, Robot Thor, Ragnarok, I think they called him. But on the other hand, it makes sense that Reed would do that because there's also this kind of disconnect, right? Whether due to his social awkwardness or what have you, where Reed doesn't really grasp what it means to actually connect with other people in a meaningful way because he can't even connect with his own family, right? Like that's one of the beautiful things that came out of Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four run a couple of years after Civil War,
Yeah.
where the Council of Reeds are like all these versions of Reed that had abandoned their family to solve the problem of everything and join the Council in the Multiverse in the Citadel. And Reed almost did that. He was kind of like, I mean, there are more important things than like family and loved ones and things like that, and solving the problems of the multiverse, And so it makes sense that his character would do that in some ways. Ultimately, he didn't, but it kind of makes sense. So yeah, I don't know, man. Like I just tend to hand wave all that stuff away and just be like, Civil War's amazing.
Hell yeah, dude. Without spoilers for the future of my list, Civil War is in my top 2, certainly.
Oh,
And
wow.
not
Same.
2.
Mm.
Not to spoil, but let me spoil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, people who listen to this
Yeah,
podcast
it's
know
obvious, yeah.
my feelings. Shouldn't be a surprise. We really do have to move the show forward. Rob, you are welcome to hang out with us if you would like to. We have a little bit more show to do beyond our top 5. But I really, really have enjoyed the hell out of this like little mini Civil War dissection because I could talk about Civil War all day.
Yeah, I mean, I'll hang out a little bit longer if you guys are down, but like, yeah,
Cool.
I need to run some errands here in about an hour or so.
Yeah, no problem. We have just a few more topics here today, and we're gonna have to kind of blow by them. But is DC's move back to Wednesdays hurting comics? That is what Bleeding Cool put up an article about this week with the suggestion that maybe DC's decision to go from Tuesdays to Wednesdays actually wasn't a good thing. So here's the argument. This is an article by Rod Lamberti, who is a comic book shop owner that was allowed to do an article for Bleeding Cool. And I thought it was fascinating. So I'm going to read just a little bit of it and then, we'll take it in. So he says, in July, DC started moving their new comics on sale dates from Tuesdays to Wednesdays. It was a foolish thing to do for me as a comic book retailer, and DC's sales dropped because of it. Sales dropped because people were no longer coming in on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. What is one of the many things a comic store should do? Get people to come into their store. The more people that come in, the more chances of them spending money. When I go to Target because I need soap and then come back the next day because I need toothpaste, people at Target don't question why I have to come back. They are a big business. Target wants people to come in as many times as possible. The second time I went, I saw something else and decided to buy it, along with the item I went to Target for. Or I even buy more than one item, like a bunch of Magic the Gathering packs. That's more sales for Target. Multiply that by thousands of people who do that at Target, and that adds up. I had people coming in upset that DC was no longer being sold on Tuesdays. I told people this for a month, though many were still in the habit of coming in on Tuesdays for new comics. I had one person who I had seen once in a blue moon pick up previously released comics and then ask where the new DC titles were. Then I told him I could no longer sell DCs on Tuesdays. He put the titles he could have bought back on the shelf. I told him those I could sell to him with no problem because they were previous releases. He just left. So it's a great article. I think everybody should read it, but I gave you the gist of his point, which is that DC wanting to align more with where the comics industry is actually damaged sales for comic book retailers whose audiences have been conditioned for the last 4 years by DC that Tuesdays is DC Day. Do you guys agree with Rod's perspective?
For me, I read digital, so I have a little less stake in this game. um, in fact, Tuesday was beneficial to me because if I'm reading for the show on Thursdays, DC could be my day to catch up, so I'm not reading a whole chunk Wednesday night or Thursday, during my lunch break. So doesn't really matter to me. But I would rather just go once a week if it's I'm putting my mindset back into when I was buying physical copies. I don't want to have to go twice a week. And then if I go on Wednesday, and now the chance of me getting the DC books that or variants or whatever that I wanted on Tuesday is less, that means less DC books for me. So if I can do one-stop shopping, even if I'm going to Target, I'd rather do one-stop shopping. I don't want to have to go back. If I came back, it's because I screwed up. Um, so I don't see how this tracks, in my opinion.
I think it's just you have the opportunity for more traction, and I think that's the thing. Like just from like thinking from a retail perspective, I think ensuring that you have multiple reasons for people to come back to a store is more advantageous because you can build a habit around 2 days versus the one day. I think you will have the people who want to come in a single day, Wednesday, maybe they miss out on a book. That's not, that bad. But to have people and have the opportunity to come in back to back because they want to, especially if they're in it week to week, they are the Wednesday, Tuesday warrior. I whenever I go pick up a a comic in physical, last one was a couple weeks ago, but I end up picking up random stuff off the shelves too because I'm like, oh, I'm here for this comics. Oh, that's right. I forgot that volume 2 of my favorite thing is Monsters came out. I dropped $50 on that, right? Because it was there. I had the opportunity to come in. If I were to come in the next Tuesday, the following or that Wednesday, right after that Tuesday, I would have bumped into something else because I know myself and I know that that's the habit of me entering a store. And I think retailers can take advantage of that, not in a malicious way, obviously, but they could push more books in more frequency, even though you have people who maybe only come in on either day and they risk the chance of missing out on a book because at the end of the day, you're in a comic book store and you have the opportunity to buy and purchase.
That's the thing that makes the most sense to me. The more excuses to get people into a comic book store, the better the comic book stores are going to do. And we we all predicted doom when this first happened, during COVID. Admittedly, we couldn't see past COVID. And now that COVID is past, quote unquote, your mileage may vary on that statement. But now that we're back to normal, quote unquote, your mileage may vary. The, it's worked. It's got, we're not seeing so many comic shop closures. There is more money being spent in comic book shops.
Has it worked if they're changing it though?
Well, my argument would be, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not, I can't say I'm privy to it. Flo Dameron just gave us a 5 spot. And he said retailers complained when they moved to Tuesday. It's literally why they went back to Wednesday. And I don't know if I get that, or I don't know if I'm with that statement. But what it does read to me, the whole situation is it's sort of another broader Warner Brothers DC positioning of like they just don't care about the retailers.
Rob, I would love to hear from you on the question at hand. Do you think that DC's hurting stores by moving back to Wednesdays? But also B, are you a physical man or a digital man?
I'm a digital guy. Like I'm gonna voice a very unpopular opinion here. in certain circles. Um, I think comic book stores are archaic. I think comic book stores are reminiscent of a bygone age, right? Like this is not the days of Phil Seuling, when he pitches the idea of the direct market to um, Jim Shooter, and to oh my God, what's his name? The guy that took over as editor in chief after Stan Lee. I can't remember his name. But anyway, it's not the 70s anymore, right? Like there was a time where comic book stores had their era, right? Between the Overstreet Price Guide in 71 going up to the collapse of, or near collapse of the comic book industry in the 1990s. Like, yeah, that was the era of comic book stores. But like it's the digital age, right? And as a guy who used to travel to Comic Cons with 20 floppies in my backpack, reading through them on a plane, life became a lot easier when I would just download the Comixology app back in the day and just read them on an iPad. Right. And
I feel
so
that. I feel
if
that.
if a lot of these complaints about well, it's hurting business and all that kind of stuff are coming from comic book stores like the one down the road, right, in Fort Collins, that is a comic book store that does nothing but comics. They've still got Venom Lethal Protector from David Michelini back in the 1990s, right, just splashed on the front, and it's all washed out because it's been there for 30 years at this point. I don't know what to tell you. Sorry about your luck, right? Like learn to adapt to the market, because you guys make I mean, it's a fantastic point to say, if what I need is to go get stuff for my house, am I going to go to a specialty soap store and a specialty shampoo store and a specialty paper towel store? Or am I going to go to Target and buy it all in one place and then leave? And that's exactly what people are going to do. Right. And so, if unless you're a store that's able to sit down and say, okay, so sure, like we sell comics, but we also sell manga, and we have like tabletop spaces for people who want to do Magic the Gathering or play Star Wars tabletop or any number of those tabletop games that are out there. They're going to succeed while others are not. But for comics themselves, it's time to move away from this era of selling physical copies, and it's time to move into like the digital age and actually put some umph into it. Not launch Marvel Unlimited, they make people wait 6 months to buy new comics. I mean, like actually put some energy into it, and I think they'd actually find a lot more success. But to your point, is DC switching to Wednesdays hurting business? Maybe, maybe not. I think that guy in that instance is cherry picking, right? When he says like, he's like, it's killing our businesses. Why? A dude came in here on Tuesday and just decided that like he wasn't going to buy any comics because new DC comics weren't out that day, and just chose not to come back the next day. Okay, well that's like one guy. That's like a guy, right?
And also, was he busy the next day? Like, will he
Yeah.
come back next week and get those same comics? Like,
I mean, I've been part of the comic book scene, industry, whatever, for almost 30 years at this point. You guys have been reading comics for a lengthy amount of time. We've all been in comic book stores. You know the kind of people that frequent comic book stores. Number one, you don't usually hang out and talk to them. You just go there, get your comics, and leave. And number two, like there are some special kinds of special people that go to those comic book stores. And this dude may have just been one of them, right? The guy that like goes to a movie theater that's totally empty and has an assigned seat and it's in the crappiest part of the theater and sits in that seat because that's the seat that he was given. And the idea of like sitting anywhere he wants to just doesn't cross his mind, right? Like folks that just kind of live in this sort of rigid path, and to use an example of just a guy that represents the point that you're trying to make, as opposed to building your point around what's actually happening, is totally different. But again, I don't have access to like all the behind the scenes information. I don't work for Diamond or any of those companies, and so I can't tell you with any measure of certainty if like DC moving to Tuesdays was costing comic book stores 30, 40, 50% of the business that they were getting beforehand. Like I can't say with any real measure of certainty if that's the case. Now, if it turns out to be that that is right, that like there was an actual decline in sales for comic book stores with DC Comics when they moved to Tuesdays, then you'll get no argument from me there in terms of them saying like DC needs to go back to Wednesdays. Like if there's an issue, I don't know. I mean, there is a point to be made here about saying that like the fan base has been conditioned to buy comics from DC on Tuesdays. Okay, cool. So like just buy them on Wednesdays now. Problem solved. Like it's not rocket science. It didn't make them inaccessible, right? Just wait 24 hours and then go to the store and buy them. Like it's I don't know.
One of the,
I don't really know.
one of the things I like to do, especially with Bleeding Cool articles, is read the Facebook comments to them when they share the post, because
Bruh.
that's where I see like, oh, I own a comic book shop. Oh, I own a comic book shop. It's like
Oh.
that generation is there. I see, and most of the comments for this one were like, nah, it's better. This one day I have to plan for, you know. So this does feel anecdotal. Like I don't
Yeah.
want to discredit this guy's opinion or his what he's seeing, but it does feel very anecdotal and maybe not pervasive of everyone's opinion on what's going on here.
Yeah.
So I do want to say that first of all, I definitely didn't read the whole article, and I think it is quite good. You know, he does make a lot of other points that are really salient about the relationship with lunar distribution as different from diamond, and how some of those things make it easier. So he talks about how when it was diamond, you know, and DC books were being shipped out through diamond, they would get the books on Tuesday to be put on display by Wednesday. You know, that's always been the way it's worked in comics, or at least for the last, 20 years through Diamond, where it was really tough to get your books with ample time to prepare your shop to put them out. But with Lunar and the way that they've done things, and Penguin Random House and some of these other distributors that have entered the space, that is not true anymore. Nowadays, you do get your comics with a little bit more lead time. So the point he was making with that was, we have the time to set up our stores for 2 launch dates. So it's not the same industry in that regard anymore. So we don't actually need to make this change back to Wednesdays, because it's not a big deal for us anymore. The problem that I have with this argument is that that's only one point of the problem with having multiple distributors on multiple days. The other side of that coin is all of the busy work that goes into having to deal with multiple distributors who have different systems that you, the retailer, have to learn in order to purchase your books and do all of the back end stuff that's required for a comic book shop to function. And those things are easier under one distributor with one day. We're never going back to the days of one distributor. So that's out the window. So how can you make it a little bit easier? By having one day. I'm selfish. I want physical books, and I want them on Wednesday. There wasn't one single Tuesday across 4 years that I went to my LCS, which is Midtown Comics, ever. I wouldn't do it. I'll never do it. I will only go on Wednesday, or if it all shifts to another day, I'll go that day. But Wednesday's the day. Any other day might as well not exist. There might as well not be a comic book shop. I'm going one day.
Even when you screw up and you maybe get the wrong issue or forget an issue, that's next week's problem.
Yep.
Yeah. Just add it to the pull list.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's right. Yeah.
I mean, there was something kind of nice about reading on Tuesday, then being able to get a break, and then read on Wednesday. But it's not like a deal breaker.
Yeah.
That's where I am. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good pacing for your own reading habits. Digest a bit more. I felt like can enjoy the books a bit more, because it's not a rush to finish through a slew of your list.
You're taking sips throughout the week as opposed to just chugging on Wednesday.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, especially if you're running a YouTube comic book channel and you got to review this kind of stuff, right? If it's just like, okay, so we got Wednesday, guys, we got to read it all, right? But I don't know though, man, because I'm going to ask you guys a serious question, right? So DC just launched Absolute Power.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, what was there to read? You have Batman, World's Finest. Superman from Philip Kennedy Johnson was really, really good.
Yep.
You got Jason Aaron's Action Comics now, but it basically just started, right? We're what, like 6, maybe 7 issues into it so far?
He's already off it.
He's already off of it?
Yeah. He did a 3-issue arc, and then Joshua Williamson took it over again, and now Gail's on it. And then when she leaves, Josh will be back again.
Yeah.
Oh, see, I know he did like I Bizarro. Like I know that was like his inaugural run.
Yeah.
I thought Williamson took over temporarily while Jason Aaron was doing whatever. And wow, yeah, that's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Well,
I actually just started following Gail Simone on
good
Oh
follow.
yeah.
Good
Twitter
Facebook follow. If you could follow her
like
on
a week and a
Facebook,
half
yeah.
ago. Yeah, so
Well,
like I have not kept up on the fact that she like I wouldn't know until like I went to go crack it open, and it's just like from Gail Simone. So I wonder why Jason Aaron left.
So, without having actual like intimate behind the scenes knowledge, what I surmise happened is that they were interested in getting PKJ off the book because they wanted to do the All Stars thing, not have Joshua Williamson have to write every single arc because he's overworked. And so they went to people like Jason Aaron and Gail Simone, whose schedules are really packed. Both of them are mercenaries right now. They're working for all kinds of publishers, so they really can't commit to too many long form things. And I think being able to have 3 issue arcs that fit in the margins of the story that Joshua Williamson is telling was the point.
Huh. That's interesting. Kind of a mortar between the bricks. Okay. I
Yeah.
could see
but
that.
I also see this with like Absolute Power and the shift that DC's doing with All In and Absolute coming up as tying into this Wednesday shift. It seems to be that they're going like this. This seems like a shift to be beneficial towards the retailer. Like they
Sure.
talked about all the physical stuff and the promotion that'll be around All in Absolute. I think they even mentioned like potential like they've done like Green Lantern rings and all that stuff. So they're going to be pushing marketing to shops as well. So this felt like, hey, this is a step that we're seeding a little bit before October to get ready for this big event that then we can kind of control the shops around our messaging.
Yeah, and by the way, I spoke improperly. It is Wade after Simone, and that's getting into the all-in
Sure.
era. So
Josh
yeah.
is on Superman. Yeah.
Yep.
It's gonna be interesting, man.
Yeah, yeah. I mean the last point I wanted to make on the subject of the LCS, I really want to leave it to Atomic Hound, who I thought made a great point. So Rudale in the comments section said adapt or die in reference to the idea that the comics industry needs to move forward. And Atomic Hound responded to that with, but you don't adapt to die. And
Mm.
that is always the point that I come back to, which is that, I think pretty much everybody would say that there are something wrong with the comic book industry, and we can all pick one thing that we think is the most wrong. But I think if any solution completely annihilates the LCS or doesn't have them in consideration, then the solution has to consider that the industry will die and thus has to radically change. And I believe that too many people will be left out of the equation to have the industry be as viable as it is. And we all know where that viability is in question. So I think it's a very large risk to completely eschew the LCS.
I don't know if I agree with that.
Okay.
I don't know if I agree with that statement. And again, the reason why I say that is if you look across the like if you look at the board in general, print media as a medium is struggling universally, right? Newspapers, magazines, the whole 9 yards. Why? Because everybody reads things digitally now. Because everybody has iPhones, Androids, tablets, different things like that. I think the biggest issue with the comic book industry right now is that the comic book industry is trying to get the world to adapt to them as opposed to the comic book industry adapting to the world. And you have to adapt to your market, your changing market, right? It's not the market's job to adapt to you, right? It would be like if Pepsi releasing this is a terrible analogy. It would be like if Pepsi released a new product and just didn't market it. It's like, well, I mean, we're Pepsi, of course they're gonna buy it. It's like, no, not really. I mean, if this again, like millennials, people like that are my age, boomers, older than me, grew up in an era where you go to a physical comic book store and you buy a comic book and then you bring it back. But you have Gen Z kids, Gen Alpha kids, right, who were born in an age where everything is done on their phone. The concept of going into a comic book store to buy a comic book just is probably foreign to them. Sure, it exists, but like there's a reason why bookstores struggle and why they're considered boutique shops, and why I would argue that comic book stores are boutique shops. So the reality here is I understand the idea that the comic book market, the direct store is like a physical thing. It exists out there and it's been there for a long time. And that's all well and good. But I think the reality here is that for longevity, at least just in the sales of comics, moving away from catering exclusively to comic book stores by putting these kind of blockades on new comics, like 6-month windows, and saying, well, if you want to read what's going on right now, you need to go to a comic book store and buy it. And instead saying, like, if you want to know what's going on with Batman right now, you can read it online or you can go to comic book stores. That's the way to go. Now, does that mean that it could lead to the decline or the death of a comic book store? Sure. But the reality here is I don't really look at comic book stores as a necessity for the success of comic books as a medium. I look at comic book stores in a lot of ways as just laboring beasts, gasping for breath, right? Reminiscent of a bygone age. That's how I see it. Now again, not everybody sees it. That's why I say that's a very unpopular opinion, right? And you'll find people on both sides. Some folks will be like, Rob doesn't care anything about comic books, and yada yada yada. And there will be people who are like, Rob wants, comic book, comic book stores to die and that kind of a thing, and people can cherry pick, the points that I'm making. But the fact is that, like, we're in 2024, the age of artificial intelligence, the age of digital information. There's no reason why we should still have the comic book industry using an analog business model in a digital age. I just don't see. I just don't see how that works. I mean, collectibles, sure, right? I've got X-Men #1, and I've got all 4 variant covers of X-Men Volume 2, issue #1. And I've got physical copies of the first appearance, or the physical copy of the first appearance of Reverse Flash that I had Joshua Williamson sign. And I've got X-Force #1, and I've got New Mutant, or what is it, Marvel graphic novel with the first appearance of New Mutants, and so on. I have physical copies of comic books, but I have maybe like 14 in my house. Everything else is digital. So yeah, that's why I say, like, I get the value of comic book stores. I get that there are people who are always going to want to see them there. But I think that as a company, it's your job to keep yourself afloat and to pursue lines of thought in the business world that does that. And I think that focusing on the idea of comic book stores and propping them up artificially is actually doing DC and Marvel more harm than good.
So I have
So
two responses to that. So the first one is that it is absolutely possible to get day and date digital comics. So there is no barrier to that. The barrier exists on the Marvel and DC apps, but
yes.
not in the marketplace. So anyone can get, I mean, our guys here read digitally, so they get their books digitally every week for us to review them on Pals Pulls at 6 p.m. Eastern on Thursdays.
Yeah.
And so you can get them if you want them digitally. You, of course, Rob, are a digital reader yourself. But then on top of that fact, we know that manga readers exist who read physically. There are plenty of people that buy them. They sell out like hotcakes. We also know that there are plenty of kids that are reading Dogman and Raina Telgemeier books and Scholastic books and etc. So there is a market for physical reading, but there is something that is keeping from people physically reading or reading in general comics, because we also know that the digital sales of comics, the last time we had real sales figures coming from the entire industry, we knew that digital comic sales were less than 10% of the entire medium's comic sales. That is a terrible number. And I think what it reflects is that the market for comic books in the direct market, in the industry, has spoken. And the market that exists wants to get their books physically. What you're talking about is creating another market that doesn't yet exist. And that is a massive gamble that could burn the whole industry down. Yes, something could rise out of those ashes, but that something won't be what we have now, and it might not actually be sustainable. Granted, we'll never know until we do it, but I would argue that the numbers don't favor that choice.
Oh, I mean, if you're talking about like the performance of comic books as a medium these days, I mean, yeah, sure. Like, here's a really good example. Okay, Sean, I want to read Spider-Man. Where do I start?
You start with what is currently happening in Spider-Man. You just pick up an issue and go.
Okay, but like, here's the issue though. So like they talk about the events of Doctor Octopus taking over the body of Spider-Man. So I mean, how do I get into that? Or
So
they talk about Parker Industries. Like, how do I get into that?
I'll answer this with my own life experience. When I started reading comic books, it was 2005, 2004-ish, somewhere in there. I started with new Avengers, Amazing Spider-Man number whatever, and Ultimate Spider-Man number whatever. I had no context for absolutely anything that was happening outside of just having seen Spider-Man in other media and whatever characters were in the books in other media. I didn't know a thing about how they were in comics. And nearly 20 years later, I'm here.
Okay, cool. So let's add the complexity of people wanting instant information now.
Wikipedia. Or your channel.
Yeah,
Your channel. You
well,
have
that's why my channel is successful,
right.
because like I've literally been to cons and people are like, I want to get into Spider-Man, but I don't know where to start. And it's like, okay, what are you interested in? Right? You have to literally sit people down. And it's almost like a job interview, right? Like where it's like, okay, so what are you interested in Spider-Man? Like, what is it about Spider-Man that you like? Well, I love Spider-Man comics that are really fun and like he teams up and stuff like that. Okay, cool. So read the comic right now with Spider-Man and Miles Morales teaming up, right? Like that works. But if somebody sits down and is like, I want to understand what's going on with Spider-Man right now, say like all new, all different Marvel when they pitch that. Okay, cool. So like they want to like just pick up all new, all different Spider-Man #1. Okay, well, Spider-Man's running Parker Industries. Like, when in the world did he create Parker Industries? Well, technically he didn't. Dr. Octopus did that during Superior Spider-Man. So you got to go read Superior Spider-Man. But in order to understand Superior Spider-Man, you got to read Dan Slott's Spider-Man and you got to read Dying Wish. But in order to understand how you get to Dying Wish, you got to start with Spider-Man Big Time. But in order to understand things in Spider-Verse, you got to go read J. Michael Straczynski's run, where you're introduced to the other and things like that. And and that's one of the things that I don't like when people compare like comics to manga, right? Because when you take something like manga, it's just a dude writing a story, and when he's done, and like that's it. There's no spin-offs really, right? Like you don't have like Dragon Ball Z and then Web of Dragon Ball Z and Superior Dragon Ball Z and all new, all different Dragon Ball Z, right? You just have like Dragon Ball, Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball Super, and GT if you choose to watch that show, right? Not really a Kira Toriyama project, but you know, still, like it's self-contained. It runs for a period of time and it's done. Now that period of time might be 5 years, it could be 30 years if you're talking about something like Berserk. But the fact is, it's self-contained, and when it's done, it's done. When it comes to like comic books, it's just always it's just a continuous story that goes on forever and ever and ever and ever, and each individual story is relative to the person who's writing it, right? It's just dependent on the person who's writing it, and some elements of those story matter and some elements of those stories don't, right? Like Scott Snyder comes along. Scott Snyder's Batman run is lauded as being like the greatest Batman run ever. He did two things in that story. He introduced the Court of Owls and he brought back the Joker, and that's it. That's all he did over the course of the entirety of his new 52 Batman run. Now, the storytelling was phenomenal, but what happened to the Court of Owls? Well, then it turns out there's some international organization and then just faded into obscurity when he left Batman. And that was it. Now, like you see them occasionally on like some monitor somewhere or something along those lines, right? But the reality here is that comic books are so intertwining and stories are so complex and narratives just go back and forth, and sometimes they matter and sometimes they don't, that it's almost impossible for the average person to know how to start with a comic book, right? How to start with a comic book character or a comic book team. It makes things insane. Like comic books, I think the biggest reason why comic books struggle in this day and age is because they're just inaccessible to the average person,
I
right?
think, yeah.
This is
Yeah,
why
it's just
things like Ultimate Comics were made. This is probably why things like Absolute Comics are being made right now.
I mean, sure, but like I have people in the comments section of my Ultimate Black Panther video or my Ultimate Spider-Man video.
Sure.
So how does this tie into like Zeb Wells' run? How does this tie into what's going on right now? It's like, well, it doesn't. It's a whole different thing, and like you have to explain that to them.
You're I'm sorry, I just want to make this
Please.
just say this last thing. You're right, but digital comics won't change that. You will still have that same problem, and they're gonna change the way that you pay for books so that you don't have the ability to just run through and consume everything for a low price. If someone says to you, you know, hey, Comics Explained, I love your channel, where should I start with Spider-Man? Whatever answer you give them, they're gonna have to go and get that book, whether it's digital or physical. The method doesn't matter. The complexity of comics will not go away because we swap from physical to digital. That's a completely separate issue.
No, I don't think that's true at all, because I literally have playlists on my channel that's like new to the X-Men, start here, right? And
Yeah,
like that's just where that's where you pick up.
but they still have to go get that book, whether it's physical or digital.
Oh, sure, but like digital gives you the ability to organize and catalog books in a way that physical just can't do, right? For a
But
variety of reasons.
but so does a notepad and pen.
Sure, but I mean, like, am I okay? I mean, let's be honest here, right? Like, am I going to sit down and say, okay, I want to read Spider Man? Well, let me break out my legal pad and my ballpoint pen and let me write down the order of the comics. People aren't going to do that because what you're talking about here, for example, are people who if what Marvel and DC is actually trying to do, they're trying to tap into the audience of people who go see like comic book movies, things like that. But they're also trying to get people who have never read comics before into comic books. Up until Iron Man 1 in 2006, when that movie was made and it was marketed, Marvel had to convince people that Iron Man was not a robot. People thought
Totally.
Iron Man was a robot, that he was a machine. They didn't know he was a person in a metal suit. Like there were people out there who didn't know that Steve Rogers is Captain. If you say Captain America, they know who you're talking about. If you say Steve Rogers, they have no clue who you're referencing, right? Even right now, with the character of like Isaiah Bradley in Captain America: Brave New World, people understand the concept of the character if they watched Falcon and the Winter Soldier, but they don't know the nature of the character because they probably never read Captain America: Red, White, and Black, and so they don't know that he was like an attempt to recreate Captain America that failed disastrously. And he was the last surviving member of his platoon, all of whom died from exposure, or I guess the grotesque nature of experimental super soldier serums. They don't know that kind of stuff,
I
right? And that's the audience that we're talking about here. Right? We're not talking about you and me and people like that who already have an affinity for comics and love to sit down and read them. But when you're talking digital, you literally like somebody goes onto dccomics.com or whatever their sub website is for comic books, right? And they just type in Batman and the response, new to Batman, start here. New 52, volume 1, new 52, volume 2, new 52, volume 3, so on and so forth. And then just read forward from there, right? Read DC Universe Rebirth #1 and then start Tom King's run. And like that's it, right? It's incredibly simple. If you walk into a comic book store, they're going to be like, okay, cool. So like, yeah, here's what you need to read. Here's a stack of 15 books that just weigh a whole weigh a whole lot, and you can carry it out to your car and take it home and read. Whereas digital, it's the psychological effect. It's just much easier to cope with. It's much easier to organize. It's much easier to structure.
I don't even think
And
it's just a psychological thing too, because I think the ease of immediate access is a thing too. Like you can link someone straight to it. Whereas if I go to a comic book shop and then I'm talking to the shop owner and he says, "Oh, you need to read Avengers Disassembled," but I'm out of stock of it.
yeah,
That immediacy is not there. So I can understand the immediacy of digital comics being better, and I think that's why things like Unlimited exist. That's why things like what's the DC one called?
Infinite.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure, whatever. They still doing Titans, the TV show? Yeah, that the immediacy I think is better, and I think for new readers, and especially in the year 2024, that is there. But I also think there is a separate fan, and I'm not sure it's the same fan who does like the collection aspect of it. Like when you brought up the whole like organizing comics and stuff like that. In my mind, I would thought, oh, I prefer doing that physically. I prefer the tactile nature of it. But I also recognize the majority of people who listen to music don't collect vinyl.
yeah.
So it's complicated for sure.
Oh,
But
I mean, you're 100% right. There's something about handing X-Men #1 from 1963 to Jim Lee and saying like, will you autograph this? And like him and his wife and his friends are gathered around like, are you sure you want to do this, man? Because it destroys the value. It's like, no, it makes it priceless to me. And then having Jim Lee sit down with me for like 15 minutes and give me like a trip down memory lane from when he first started reading the X-Men to when him and Will Portaccio were roommates out in San Diego, and then like him getting into the comic book industry and all that kind of stuff. Like, yeah, there's things about that you can't do digitally, right? Like, hey, can you take your finger and just, on my iPad, right? I mean, it's a whole different experience. But one of the things that I've learned in my time running Comics Explained for the last decade or so is there is a massive difference between people who love comics and want to get back into them, people who went to go see comic book movies and are curious about them, and people who have never seen a comic book movie and never read a comic book in their life. And somebody told them this character's cool, or they're just curious about Batman and they want to go read it. And that third group is the biggest group. That's the biggest number of people who are out there who have never seen a comic movie and never read a comic book, and for whatever reason that makes sense to nobody but them, they want to go read a Batman comic and get into Batman as a character for the first time. And digital makes that so much easier because you can catalog and you can organize with everything from, okay, like, are you curious about Batman? All right, read this comic here, right? Read like this one-shot comic, right, with Batman. And if you dig it, then here's everything else. If you really want to get into Batman as a character, then here's where you actually start if you want to become a more serious reader. You can kind of do that in comic book stores, but again, right, to Tyler's point, it's psychological, right? Like, do you want to walk out of a comic book store holding 15 trade paperbacks, or do you want to have a tablet in your hand reading them at your leisure? And I think for 99% of people out there, they want to be reading it on a tablet because they can read it on the bus. They can read it when they wake up in the morning. They can read it before they go to sleep. It's just convenient, infinitely more convenient. And I think it's more important for the comic book industry to market to that audience as opposed to marketing to what you and I, all in the entertainment industry, refer to as the vocal minority, the smallest number of people.
But in the case of, and we really do need to wrap up this
Okay,
conversation.
I feel like this could go on for like hours.
Yeah.
Good. It's
You're
good.
absolutely right about that, and we've spoken about this for hours already, and none of our minds have changed.
No, we need to
but
like, you're at Midtown, right? Like you're in New York.
yeah,
Dude, we need to like meet up at like New York Comic Con or something like that, man. And like sit down and have this conversation, dude.
it's so funny, dude, because I have seen you at New York Comic Con multiple times, but I just, was like, oh, that's Rob. So hopefully this year we can actually,
Well,
meet.
this year I won't be able to make it, but like next year.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I was hoping to get a picture with you and Sal together. But yeah, I feel like you can already do that. You can already be a person who wants to consume digitally and jump in that way. But in this industry, in the industry of comics, this is I'm pretty sure what I'm about to say is an indisputable fact. The majority of people, not the vocal minority, but the majority of people read comics one way, and that is the physical way. So it would be the flip. It would be the inverse of the percentage that you just gave. Would you say 90%? It would be 90% want to read physically and do, and 10% want to read digitally and do. And those are the numbers, those are the realities that the industry itself has to reckon with. So when your money's on the line and you have to choose between leaning in on 10% of the people you have and then a shadowy unknown amount of other people who might jump on board if you promote digital the way you promote physical, if you have to choose between that and the physical audience that's there, that's loyal, that shows up every week, some of these people are showing up twice a week. If you have to choose between those, I know where my bread is buttered and I'm going to eat that bread.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd rather just not ignore that entire other potential market in favor of a smaller guaranteed market. I mean, you can do both. That's why I say. I mean, I wouldn't say get rid of comic book stores entirely, right? We're never sending comics to comic book stores. I just think like, sure. I mean, you're 100% right. I can go on to Amazon right now and buy the issue of Batman or Absolute Power or Spider-Man or Venom War that just came out. But there's a difference between that and just signing up for whatever DC's digital version is, which no one knows the name of that, or Marvel Unlimited, and being able to read right now and read a variety of comics right now. The only reason why you have that buffer on Marvel Unlimited or whatever DC's is to spare the existence of local comic book stores. Right. That's the only reason that it's there. Right. Drop that, give people an option, and then we'll really see which one people want to go with. And I would bet you dollars to donuts, right? If Marvel Unlimited makes Venom more available the day of release, and DC, whatever theirs is, makes Absolute Power available the day of release, digital sales will outstrip local comic book stores quick, fast, and in a hurry. It'll happen like that. And that's when you know where your market is. Now, comic book stores will call foul, but hey, I don't know what to tell you, right? Like, markets change, adapt or die. Like, that's the way that it goes. So, yeah.
All right.
It's an unpopular opinion, man.
No, it's okay. And I love the debate because it's always, look, we started the show with a very big hot topic that had people on different positions, different sides. So I appreciate the conversation. And like you said, it's one that is massive and we could have for hours. And I appreciate your perspective, even though clearly we're on other sides of this thing. I appreciate that you have a different opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, no, me
Um,
too. Yeah, this kind of stuff is fun.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why we show up every Saturday at 10:15 a.m. Eastern to have these kinds of conversations. Rob, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I don't need to tell the people that are listening to me right now, Comics Explained is pretty much the godfather of what it is that we do on the comics YouTube space. Obviously, we have different kinds of channels, but when you're talking about who are the people that you aspire to, when you start off as a little old YouTuber with a dollar and a dream, and you're looking up at the titans of this part of YouTube, Comics Explained is certainly at the tippy top of what success can look like. And I know, because of being on this side of things, how hard it is to do what you do to the success level that you do it at. So hats off to you. Anyone who somehow is not subscribed to Comics Explained, go do that. Go subscribe. Go be one of the 2 million plus who listen to that sweet voice every single day, every single video release. It's a joyous chorus. We're all a part of it. Go join that at Comics Explained on YouTube. Rob, we got to do this again sometime. Really, thank you for
Oh,
joining
100%.
us.
Dude, I'd love to come back. Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. We'll talk about
We-
it. We'll talk.
Yeah, it was awesome talking to you guys. I appreciate it, man.
No, thank you.
Thanks for coming, dude.
Take
Appreciate
care.
it.
I'll catch you guys later.
That was fun.
Unexpectedly
Rad.
fun. Well,
Wow.
no, not unexpectedly fun. I knew once he was on the show, it'd be fun. But unexpected.
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 We didn't know that was going to happen.
Oh man. I'm sorry that we haven't been able to get to most of your comments, but as you can imagine, with 5 of us, chomping at the bit to, get our words in, it was very difficult to refer to the chat. But I hope you guys enjoyed that conversation. This is a very, very long episode of the Comics Pals. So what we're gonna do is we're not gonna be able to do the other news stories that we did want to get into. There's one thing that I would like to share just because I think it is worth knowing. We don't have to chew on it. If you want to give some quick thoughts, that's fine. But I did want to share that Daniel Warren Johnson announced that his run on Transformers is ending with issue number 24. So I know that many of us are big fans of that run. We've been wondering when it would come to an end. That is when it will end. So I just wanted to make sure everyone knows that.
We're on-
And
we're on-
his run or
His time on it will
Okay.
come to a close. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, excited to have had him work on it
Yeah.
in a different capacity. Like I think this is a very different day and age for comics and for IP, and so it was awesome to have him sort of leading that helm and the charge of it. That's a heavy burden, and I think he handled it really well through the art changes. The story, I think, mileage may vary. You guys had Near Mint Condition on and mentioned, him and his daughter don't like it, right? But his wife is ecstatic. So like, I think it opened up such a realm for new readers and for new reach that hats off. Sad to see you go, but excited that it's continuing from here on.
Love to watch you leave. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we're still only at, I think the issue coming up is issue 12. We just had 11 came out this week, so we have almost another year
Right.
with him. So
And like they probably don't even know who's succeeding him yet either.
yeah,
At this point.
That far down the road. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
probably right.
They're probably working on it currently, but yeah.
Amin Perez with the 5 spot. Great conversation. Don't agree with most of Rob's points, but it was awesome to have him here. Thank you, Amin. Oh, as always, really appreciate you, buddy. I mean, look, you guys who have been listening to this podcast for some time probably pretty much know where we all stand on that topic. I'm not going to belabor it. Rob has his perspective, and his perspective is similar to what Marco has said in the past or what Tyler has said. So, that's all cool. I just feel like the data speaks to one of those perspectives being more on point than the other for the industry that we have. But there is an argument to be made that the industry we have is not the one we need, but it is the one we deserve. All right, guys, we're going to call it here. Make sure that you show up on Tuesday, 6 p.m. Eastern, the Annihilation Book Club. Can't wait to present that to you guys. Very excited for that. As you close out, make sure you smash the like button if you haven't. Be subscribed to the channel. Those things both help us out a ton. Really, really appreciate you hanging out with us for this extended episode. You did get a little surprise. It was a surprise to all of us. We were joined by Comics Explained. Who could have predicted that?
And thanks so much, Rob, for showing up.
Yeah, huge shout out to Rob for doing that. Let me tell you something. When somebody has 2 million subscribers, they don't need to do guest spots. He's not trying to bring new people into the fold by showing up here. You know what I'm saying? That's just love and passion to want to randomly join a podcast on a Saturday afternoon to talk some shit.
That's love of the game right there.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Extra points.
It's Michael
Absolutely.
Jordan going to the local basketball court.
It reminds me of Charles Barkley on the court in Space Jam, getting
Yeah.
crossed up by kids. Yeah.
Hell
Yo,
yeah.
I was this close to popping out of my seat when he said, "My number 2 event is Onslaught Saga."
Yeah. Wow, you were chubbed up for that one.
I was there ready to be like, "Thank you for validating 4 years."
Well,
of
we
this
know that's
podcast
on
for
your
me."
list somewhere because it's one of the only ones you've read.
Oh.
We'll see.
Number 1, gotta be with a bullet.
Yeah. The fact that he didn't even say it yet means that it's probably not number 6. And I am horrified to hear that number 2 and that number 1. The next time we will be live with you is Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the Annihilation Book Club. Be there, be square. And then after that, it'll be Thursday at 6 p.m. for Pals Pulls. Be there or also be square. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We appreciate you. Until the next time, take care of yourselves and each other.